Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Just quickly letting everybody in the Zoom gate as the numbers increase. Just want to welcome everybody to the second day of the Chefs Manifesto Action Hub event for this summer. It's fabulous to welcome you all here. This is a sort of collaborative effort from the Irish Hub down in Waterford, from the Nigerian crew down in Lagos, Nigeria, hi to Michael, and the London Action Hub at OmVed Gardens in Highgate. The concept for these 2 days is the movement and migration of food, how people and cultures and identities move around the world. And I know that we've had a difficult time these past 4 months of being restricted in our movement. And we thought that it would be really interesting to open up the conversation around the movement of food and people. And suddenly we realized that, wow, what an amount of content to bring to people. So the first day brought some unbelievable conversations about bringing seeds back into Africa and repatriating food and reappreciating foods that had left continents and returned. We've learned all about biodiversity, soil. We talked to chefs from all over the world, and it's been quite a journey already, and I can't even believe we're going to be doing another day of this. It's just so exciting. So we are going to introduce the Chefs Manifesto to you with a short video. Also Paul, sort of the leader of the Chefs Manifesto. Hey Paul, looks like we've got some numbers flowing in, which is great. Shall we run a little quick video and give everybody a sense of what we're discussing today from Carolyn Steele?
Yeah, let's get that going. So I'm just gonna get that up and running. Just 1 second.
Just to let everybody know, a little bit of housekeeping. If you want to put some questions to the points that are being made, please go into the chat box. You can see the chat down at the bottom of the Zoom call. Inside that chat box, you can ask questions, but try to ask questions to both panelists and participants so everyone can see. So once you see the chat button, press chat button and then go to all panelists and attendees. And that means everyone can see it, unless you want to send a private message of love and happiness to people privately. But yeah, so all panelists and attendees, so everybody can see your questions. And yeah, I guess a cue video.
Here we go.
Hi, Paul.
So my name's Carolyn Steele, and I'm delighted to be here today to introduce to you the new Chefs Manifesto event on migration, movement, and food ownership. These are huge topics and ones that I know we're going to cover in amazing detail over the 2 days of the event. But just to give you some idea of what's involved in this subject, and if we take the idea of movement, for example, a very obvious thing to say is that we live on a moving planet. And indeed life itself and certainly food wouldn't exist in the form that we know it if it wasn't for the fact of seasons and weather and day and night and all of the constant change and movement that is the basis of life. So in a way, food binds us to time in this sense, and it also binds us to place. So another thing to say about food and movement is that, I mean, essentially we're all migrants. I mean, we all started off life in Africa, we spread around the world, and as we did so, we've taken our food with us, but we've also settled in places where we've discovered new foods and new ways of feeding ourselves. So the discovery of food and the discovery of how to exist on a place and feed ourselves is really the basis of home and also the basis of our sense of belonging, which is such a fundamental and important part of just feeling good as a human. It's, one could say it's a sort of survival need, actually, is to feel that one belongs somewhere. Of course, with migration, there's this issue of, am I from the place where I was born or am I from the place where I've ended up? And of course, food as well very often expresses this kind of tension, but also this joining together, this mixing. So For example, foods themselves have moved all over the world. I mean, we think of, for example, the tomato as essentially Italian. You know, you can imagine a pizza without tomato on it. But of course, tomatoes originated in South America. In fact, for the first century, they were treated as a purely decorative plant in Italy. Similarly, chili, I mean, if I say the word chili to you, you probably immediately think of Asian food. But in fact, chilies also originated in Central and South America, and they only were introduced by the Portuguese in the 15th century and then spread all the way through Asia. Similarly, fish and chips, you know, what could be more British, except of course potatoes also originated in South America, so the great British national dish. In fact, basically, I mean, if you include avocados, which came from Mexico, you know, pretty much all of us are now Central and South Americans in the way we eat. And you could even say with the arrival of fast food, we're all North Americans as well. So there's a huge number of issues to do with the sort of authenticity and the identity associated with food, and how that both locates us in a place, but also how it sort of introduces us to other cultures and other places. And I mean, last but not least, I think it's very interesting to say that in relation to this question of where we belong, food has never lost its potency. So even though most of us these days live in cities, and our food arrives from thousands of miles away often, that food is still of a place. And I often say, that the food on your plate is like an emissary from another world. So it makes us conscious of other lives, of other places. It joins us to those places. And in a way, it expresses this tension that we always feel between being located in a place and also being part of a global and ever-shifting planet. So I think these are hugely exciting and important issues. I could go on, but I won't, because we can talk more during the event itself. But just to welcome you and to encourage you to join this event. And I think we're going to have an amazing couple of days discussing movement, migration, and the ownership of food. Thanks a lot. Do join us.
Well, Arthur, you're muted.
Carolyn, thank you so much for producing that video for us. It's fantastic, and it's great to see you. And Carolyn will be joining us later on today to almost spend some time with us to kind of really pull together the content over the past 2 days and what we've been learning. So that's fabulous to have Carolyn with us. And Paul, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to a very, very...
Arthur, just before we get started, just to let people know, we do have a live stream on Facebook. So if there's people that you think as you're listening, you go, they need to dial in. We're going for the next few hours. So feel free to share that out, share that live feed, let them have a look. Yesterday we had over 500 people engaging on the Facebook views. And so there was a number of people getting in board. We're also going to make sure that this is available afterwards, and so we'll put it also on YouTube, so it will be there. And just feel free to also share on social media. Just hashtag Chefs Manifesto, and we'll also keep an eye on that. But we do want this to be interactive, so we will be keeping an eye on the chat, the Q&A, and there will also be some polls and some exit surveys, because we really want to have this as interactive as possible. And so we can't have everyone presenting and everyone speaking, but what we can do is we can all be participating in the conversation via those tools. So Arthur and I will try and bring people in, as well as our other facilitators and presenters as we go. So just wanted to kind of just frame that up for everyone, Arthur.
Cool, great. Well, here we go. Second day, migration movement of food and people and identity. We have an amazing panel now of people from all over the world. We have Anjli, who's going to lead a discussion with Chef Pinky and Chef Chandni, exploring food identity through life experiences. That might just be a part of the subject matter for the next 30 minutes. So Anjli, Chef Pinky, Chef Chandni, if you could unmute and get your videos rolling, and we'll hand over to you for the next 30 minutes.
I think I need Paul to switch my camera on.
Me too.
You need to press the video. Just press video.
Now I'm here. Hello.
Hi, Anjli. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Looking so well. So we got Pinky joining us.
My video. Paul has to, and it says the host unmute me. Has stopped my video. Okay, stop my video. Got it.
Click video. Click video. There we go.
There we go.
Perfect. One more. Chef Chandni.
Mine's saying the same thing.
There we go.
There we go. There we go.
Well, so Anjli, we hand over to your competent hands, and
Thank you so much.
yeah, I'm so interested to hear what's going to be said. So okay, take it away.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to Chefs Manifesto. Kicking off day 2 is a bit of an honour, and sort of going after Carolyn Steele is an even bigger honour. I'm such a huge fan. So we are talking about food culture and identity. Because I've not had an opportunity to wear any clothes from my culture, I thought today would be the opportunity to wear a sari for you. So I've kind of written a small piece that sets the tone of the conversation, conversations that we're going to be having with Chef Chandni Gudka, that's from England via Africa and India, and Chef Lina Pinky Maruping, I hope I'm saying that correctly, and she is from South Africa. So both phenomenal chefs with incredible histories, and we're going to be going on a journey through their lived experience of food and working in food today. But just to start that conversation, I've just written a small piece for you that hopefully frames the narrative. So one meal can evoke a plethora of memories, emotions, and pain. It is a plate is both a symbol of abundance and scarcity, and we experience it from life to death. It forms the central part of human identity and individuality. It's a vehicle for exchange. The migration of communities creates a bespoke culture wherever they arrive, the arriving, the settling, and then the leaving again. Communities leave a taste of their culture in every environment, whether it's the Portuguese introducing the chili to India by way of South America, or the Turkish kebab shops of London, the authentic Cantonese dim sum you'll find in sort of the food markets of Calcutta, or Leicester's curry mile. Or maybe it's even the Pakistani breads that you'll find at 3 in the morning in a very well-known West African market in East London. Migrant cuisine is a core intermingling and culinary expectation of most global cities. Now, during COVID-19, and we're still in that space globally, we've gotten used to a new norm of eating. Eating and cooking at home have become our core place of comfort. Yeah, with such vibrant exposure to food and global cuisine outside of our homes, what did we cook inside our homes? Was the cuisine reflective of our heritage or of our roots? Or was it more of a journey of our own life and our lived experiences and our satiation? Did we cook meals that were embalmed in memories, joy, and comfort? Did we eat cuisine that just made us feel safe and warm? If the migration of ingredients and people is constant and ever evolving, how do we find a way home in our food? And how does it shape the way we feel at home? Now, I'm speaking to chefs, and I recognize that chefs do not always get the opportunity to get emotional and to think deep about their memory of food. So by speaking to 2 chefs and me being a chef myself, I hope this provides many of us an opportunity to sink deep into our own history. So kicking off, I would like to start with a first question, which is sort of pushing into our pasts. So Chef Pinky, would you be able to tell me sort of your first memories of food and why they were so important?
I think, when you talk about people's memory of food, everybody has got a childhood memories when it comes to food, family meals, ranging from holiday gatherings, cultural rituals, or ordinary breakfast, lunches, and dinners served around the kitchen table. But for me, every week I was looking forward to Sunday lunch, which we call Sunday course. And there was one only obstacle there. It was just to get over the church session in the morning, because I know after that, the rewards would be a table filled with all the soulful comfort food that my dad usually cooks. And he loved cooking wholesome soul food. He had a flair for preparing the Sunday course, which we call 7 colors. And it consists of the staples, which is the rice, or the pap, which is made from maize meal. So in Nigeria, they call it fufu, or we use mealie rice. And it would have all the colors, so all the 7 colors. It would have green, it would be spinach, yellow would be pumpkin, orange would be a chutney or a relish called chakalaka that is made from the carrots and the tomatoes. And then you would have your coleslaw, you would have your beetroot, and you would have your beef stew or your roast chicken. But then in those days, having red meat, it's like you can only have it when there is a gathering, like a wedding, or the paying lobola or something. So Sunday you get the whole shebang. But one thing what I liked about this memory that we are still doing and we're carrying all over South Africa is that it is a well-balanced meal versus what we usually eat during the week.
It's really interesting you mention the relationship with your childhood memory being about a balanced meal. And even that balance is in your present moment as well, which is such an important word that can sort of sometimes be, it's a very wellness oriented term right now, but you can place it back in your childhood, which I think sometimes now it's hard to place. It's more of a trend than a memory, potentially for the future generation. I'd like to take the same question to Chandni. What's your first memory of sort of food and interaction? And historically, where are you from?
So I was born in here in the UK. Although, even though I was born here, I would say that probably my fondest memories of food from my childhood were probably, I spent a lot of time in Kenya, East Africa. And so my grandparents had migrated over from India. And so communal living was a huge thing out there. So, like they had big houses, all my uncles and aunts all lived together. And so within communal living, food was a really integral part of it. Like the men would come back from the office at lunchtime to all have lunch together. So that was a big thing. And also we have something called a Spcacey out there, which is essentially an outdoor kitchen. And that's where, at nighttime, like the men would all get together and they would have something called a cookout. So they'd all, like, everything would be prepped beforehand, and they sit down, they all like sit and like cook together. And it was like it was exclusively men only, but if you were a kid, you were kind of allowed in. So it was like you were part of the secret club. So that was in the evenings, but then also during the day, my grandma would be they made everything from scratch there. So, curries, chapatis, all the Indian snacks, like what we call Bombay mix here, our traditional chevro, that was all made from scratch. So my grandma would like make everything from scratch. And as she got older, she became less mobile. So she would sit there and I would kind of spend my time, running to the pantry to go and get her whatever she needed. And I would just sit there and like watch her cook. So that's probably my fondest memories.
That's really beautiful. I think what's really amazing about this dialogue, just by hearing both of your stories, is that you're both from Africa. Pinky, you are born and bred South African, and you're there right now. And Chandni is Indian diaspora, that's twice removed, and now in England. So the memory of food and the relationship back to your native land and the core processes that you went through in community, cooking outdoors, is really, really similar. I think if Chandni, it would be really, from your perspective, if growing up, Chef Pinky talked about these this 7-colored meal being representative of her Sunday meal. Was there anything like that for you growing up as Indian diaspora in the UK?
So I think my mum brought that home with her, and again, like growing up here, we always had, like you, Chef Pinky, we always had like a really colourful table. You know, you'd have like 1 or 2 shucks, which are curries. You'd have some kind of lemon rice, chapatis, and it was always quite colourful, flavourful, wholesome, nourishing. Yeah, we had a lot of Indian food growing up at home.
Amazing. So I'm going to switch over to, I'm going to talk about produce, about what you, because I feel like produce is a really important part of these journeys from the African subcontinent, but also from your journey as well, Chandni, because Chef Pinky, the other day when we were in deep conversation on Saturday morning, you talked a lot about the representation of native produce, indigenous produce to South Africa from when you were a child and the role that it has today. Could you speak more to that conversation?
Yeah, the problem that we're having right now is that those indigenous ingredients are not easily accessible. So you can go to any retail stores, they are not there. The farmers would love to, farm, but if they're not going to give, they're not going to make profit out of it, they will only just farm less. So for us, let me take, for instance, Bambara groundnuts. When I grew up, I never knew Bambara groundnuts in an English name. I knew it in my language, which is Ditlou Marapo. So the outer skin of the Bambara nuts is hard like a bone. So hence we say Ditlou Marapo. So it means beans covered in bone, sort of like direct translation. So now, if we don't call those indigenous ingredients by name, people won't relate to them, number one. We need to educate our people about those indigenous ingredients and in our ethnic name and with English and any other languages. But then right now, I managed to get Bambara groundnuts. Somewhere, a friend of mine brought it for me. But then it's been packed and the outer part of the nut is out. So it's been peeled off. So when you're going to buy it in retail, already it's going to be expensive. So it's not affordable. But what I would like to see is that all those ingredients would come back into retail and people would, embrace them and start to learn about them, because COVID has showed us something, that people want to eat healthy if given an opportunity, because right now the market is saturated with convenience food and people are in a hurry. But when you're home, you don't need all those convenience food. And so I think this is the right time when all those ingredients, those indigenous ingredients should come out. Like an indigenous ingredient like amaranth leaves. We don't use amaranth seeds. We use amaranth leaves. It's like our African spinach. So if you're going to have cream spinach in your dish, we would have that. So you cook it with your tomato, onion, garlic, and then you add amaranth. But then what we used to do is we take the peanuts, we ground the peanuts, and then you add it in. But today, because, people don't just buy raw ingredients, there's too many convenience products. So you take peanut butter and then you add it in, but then you use, the not the smooth, the crunchy peanut butter to have the crunch in your amaranth. So do we get the amaranth easily accessible? No. You only get it on the pavement where the ladies are selling it because they are growing it in their yards. But retail, no. So how are we going to get people to eat those ingredients that are freely, they freely grow in our country, the climate agrees, but yeah, it's just a matter of if it makes profit or not.
I think what you're saying is such a valid point, because you mentioned 2 or 3 really core areas there. It's first of all identifying the name of the item and deciding what name needs to be, what is the right name for this, because if you live in a country like India, there's multiple different languages, multiple different names for one item. So how do we collectively decide on what is the name for this product within our country and also outside of our country? And do you have, as a person from that country, do you have a control and a say of how this item is named and how it's sold and positioned in markets? The second thing you mentioned, which is really important, is you talked about who sells this product. Is this product being sold by the person on the corner of the street because they know about this produce? This is produce that they've learned through. This is something that's been passed down to them. But this same product is not represented in the supermarket. So if 60 or 70% of most people, I think it's probably a higher number, are shopping at supermarkets, they're not, that specific item is not being represented in their supermarkets. So this idea of naming identity and representation, even without talking about yourself as a chef or cooking a cuisine, if the foods that are connected to our history are not represented equally in environments, then how do we connect and how will others connect? And I think what would be really interesting to a viewpoint is to understand, Chandni, we spoke yesterday and you talked about this, when you went to culinary school and when you decided to become a chef, about seeing your cuisine within that environment and sort of that assimilation / displacement. Would you be able to talk more of that experience?
Yeah, of course. It's funny because the whole aspect that ignited my kind of like interest into learning more about gastronomy was probably my roots. My mum, my dad, watching my grandma cook, like that's probably what made me want to learn more. And I thought that I was working in the city at the time and I knew that I wanted to change my career, so I went to chef school. And it's funny because I was classically trained being French classical cooking, and although there's some incredible techniques, I felt like I was being pulled away from my roots and what the kind of food and cooking that was true to me. And I spent probably the first 2-3 years of my career cooking mainly European cuisine, and I just felt like I wasn't being true to myself. And a big part of that as well was cooking meat too. I grew up in a vegetarian household, but after going to culinary school, you had to learn how to cook everything. And at the time as well, when I was looking for a culinary school, there wasn't one that did just solely vegetarian cooking. And so I went and I learned everything and I applied myself to it all, but it didn't really sit right with me. And it took me a few years to think. For a while I thought, I had to cook meat and I had to cook it well in order to be a justifiable chef. But then a couple of years ago, I sort of said to myself, I was like, no, you know what, I'm not comfortable cooking it. And also I want to express myself and like my culture and through my cooking. And it took a while for me to come around to that. And when I did, and I decided to turn down jobs where, I wasn't cooking something purposeful to me, it felt so right.
That's what I find very interesting about that narrative is that I think your personal epistemology and your arrival into the UK was by way of the British Empire, because it's the British Empire that opened up gateways for passage for Indians and specifically Gujaratis and Goans to move to East Africa to work, to set up businesses, etc. And the same opportunity, the same doors were granted open in England. Yet when you arrive in England, there is an assimilation problem of, even though curry is the national dish of the country that we've been exploring for the last few days, and everybody loves a bit of spice now, and Conor is a staple on everyone's table. But this idea of being a chef, working in an environment, but not being able to feel that your own history and your own identity being represented in your work environment, or feeling as if there was space for it. And I wonder if, having had a restaurant in India and been, run a couple of restaurants in England, I've experienced different ways. I felt very comfortable cooking whatever I wanted to in India, but in India it was always seen in some ways to cook. If you could cook European food and you could do it really well, it was good that you're an Indian and you could cook European food really well. I just wonder for you, Chef Pinky, cooking in South Africa, what is it that you cook all the time? What is it? Have you ever felt othered by your own food? Because when we spoke over the weekend, you talked about South African cuisine being a fusion cuisine because of its history of and its relationship to Europe, to South America, to Asia. So would you be able to speak more about how you felt cooking your own cuisine?
Just like what you said now, if almost all the African chefs, if you can't cook French cuisine, you're not a good chef. So if you're cooking African cuisine, it's kind of like looking down on you that you're not good enough. And that's where we have to work as African chefs. And I'm not just meaning South Africa, but the whole of the African continent. We need to be proud and own our identity. Look at when you say pasta, who are you thinking of? You can identify with Italy, but look, when you say Japanese, you think sushi. If you say hamburgers, you say America. If you say South Africa, what comes into mind? Not much, because we have a fusion. We have 11 tribes living in South Africa, and then we have, foreign people who live in our country. Hence, our country is called a rainbow nation. So it's very difficult to pinpoint 2 or 3 dishes saying it's South African and identify that it's South African cuisine. But it's not a downfall for me. It's like it opens up doors, because it's like an oyster is, it's your world, and you have a playing field to play. And with me, with my cooking journey, I've experienced that I love fusion. And with fusion, I've identified where my palate is good at. And yes, I love cooking African, cuisine. But for me, I enjoy curries. And most of my friends, they call me a butter chicken curry queen. So the fusion that we get in our country, it's a big plus, but we just need to identify what is our food.
Wow, that's it. There is this, it's almost as if there's this personal rejection of, there's this personal rejection because there's so many options, or in Chandni's case, it's a case of, well, I don't see, my food is not anchored visually outside of myself with an identity. So how do I anchor it here? So I feel like there's this conversation, this narrative of it's feeling proud about it. It's identifying it clearly what it is for yourself, which I feel, I've spoken to you both about, and we said there's a massive education piece that in future generations will will 20 years from now, will our children, I don't have any children, but my nieces, my nephews, will they know what future cuisine, will they know what Indian cuisine was? Will they know what South African cuisine was? So, I mean, just whilst I'm speaking to you, Chef Pinky, you've got a boy and a girl, and you were saying to me the other day that one's more of a fan of like potatoes, the other one's super healthy, super energetic, and he's jumping around everywhere. But they've got both quite different eating styles. But you said one thing, you said they feel like the vegetable comes from the supermarket, which I think is such an important thing. And what do you think needs to be done to, if we talk about identity and culture in food as a chef, as a mother, as a South African woman, what do you think you would like to see done to keep the heritage there for your children in the future? It's a very broad question, I know.
Yes, but I think, the basic thing needs to be done. We need to educate. Okay, so firstly, that an apple doesn't come from Pick and Pay shop. It comes from a tree. When I grew up, I've never seen a turmeric bulb. I've never seen it. The only thing that I've seen in my entire life is turmeric powder. And that's how I thought that it came, period. But for us, it starts at home. It needs to start at home. It needs to start at the community. It needs to start in the Chef Manifesto, as global as it is. What is guacamole? Guacamole doesn't come as mashed. It comes from an avocado. And where does an avocado come from? It comes from a tree. So we need to educate, the young and coming kids so that they can carry it with them, knowing, okay, so don't just know this is an apple. Why do we eat apples? Why is it good for you? And if you don't have these nutrients in your body, what happens? So there is no purpose for us eating. We mostly eat because of enjoyment, or we call them come and eat. They don't eat to nourish their food, their bodies. So that's where we need to educate and make sure that everybody knows the ingredients and what are the beneficial.
Okay, so I'm gonna take that and what Chandni said, and because I know Arthur's just put his camera on, and so I've got like 2 minutes to wrap up. I taking into consideration of where we started, is if that food is neither mine nor yours, food is constantly moving, and it will move long after we exist on this earth. During the last 3 months, what did it feel like eating at home for you? Chandni, can you give me 3 words of what home felt like for you?
3 words. Going back to basics.
Yeah.
Going back to basics. Like going back
to basics.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about for you, Chef Pinky?
I think definitely going back to basics, but then cooking well-balanced meals, because there's no more make or KF. Everything is scratch cooking, and you involve the kids. Peel the carrots. This is boiling. This is roasting. So when we start like that, then they go like, so where does, the other day they asked me, where does hamburgers come from? They don't know where it comes from. They think it comes from it comes from a cow. It's minced. It's beef minced. So definitely, the cooking has been fun, lots of fun, but educational and nourishing our families.
Well, lovely. So taking it back to basics and keeping it healthy and education. I feel like this conversation's gone for so long. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up and I'm going to hand over to Arthur. Thank you, Chef Pinky and Chef Chandni.
Thank you.
Anjli, I don't think I need to do anything now. I think you just carry on. You're doing so brilliantly.
It was great. Amazing conversation.
Chef Pinky, Chef Chandni, the Chefs Manifesto is what you both represent. This is really why the world needs to open up to the conversations of chefs from all over the planet. And Anjli, your points and your discussion are just so rich, and these are the types of directions that the Chefs Manifesto needs to be going in and talking about all the time. And I agree with everything you said, Chef Pinky, Chef Chandni. I'm jealous for all of the experiences that you both had, you know, in Africa and Europe, and I haven't been to India yet, but I just need to get there because I know the cuisine in India is by far the most superior to the rest of the world, but we can argue about that another time. Right, well, unfortunately, we do have to move on, but I was literally just sitting here listening, meditating, and just flowing through all of the continents and flavors of food and experience. And I can't thank you enough for what you just brought to the Chefs Manifesto and kickstarted this second day. It's so, so positive. And now we're going to make it to other parts of the world with other chefs. We're going to speak to French chefs and Irish chefs and even Chef Eli Kisiombe, who's going to be introduced to you by Chef JB and Chef Conor. So while I'm waffling here, Chef JB, Chef Conor and Chef Eli, I wonder if you could go live with your mute buttons and your video buttons. Saying goodbye to Pinky and to Chandni and to Anjli, but I know you're staying all day. Please give us points and comments. We will come back to you at the end of the day when the chefs can come together and discuss this, because I'd love to talk more about that.
And Arthur, I was just going to jump in. It's great to see the people watching live on Facebook as well.
Yeah.
Shout out to Chef Scar and Rahul and a number of others coming in from different parts of the world. So make sure if you are enjoying the conversation, share it, and you'll be able to watch it again online. So there was in the chat a short survey that Anjli shared, and if you have had a chance to do that, take a look and please try and see if you can fill that in. It's got some really interesting questions, and she's happy to share some of the results. So.
Have we lost Conor? Conor, you dialing in?
I'm here.
I am. We've got your video. Have we got JB?
We've got JB. We've got Ali.
We've got Ali. Okay, great. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to hand over now, because yesterday we had some facilitation coming from the Lagos, Nigeria hub, from Michael and his panel. Now we've got Michael and Conor and JB putting together some conversations from the Irish hub's perspective. So we welcome in Chef Conor Spcacey, Chef JB, and Chef Eli. I think Conor and JB are going to run through a few points before they go through to an interview process with Eli and have a talk about her experiences. Conor, JB,
yeah, hi.
What's up? How you doing?
Hi.
See you, man.
Over to you guys.
Can you guys see me okay, yeah?
Yeah, we can see you. Arthur and I are going to disappear, and we'll leave it you to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sign
brilliant.
off. Okay, Conor, the mic is yours. You got JB there, yeah?
Yeah,
I'm here, yeah.
He is there, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see you in 30 minutes. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Hi, everybody. So just to kick off, we're going to have a great discussion today about past, present, and future of the movement of food. And I think I'm going to start off about how Ireland is what it is today and how the movement of food and people has made Ireland the great country for food culture that it has become today. But I can't start that until I talk about my past and how I was brought up and what was the norm for me living at home. So my parents, my mother is Irish and my dad is Welsh, but they spent a lot of the youth, even before they met and married, traveling pretty much around the globe. My mother is a nurse and my dad an industrial chemist. So they spent a lot of time traveling and through work, and my mother especially would have lived in many countries, including Italy, India, Australia, and settled for a long time in Kenya, and then moved down to Zambia, where she met my dad, and they fell in love, married. My older siblings and all were born in Zambia, and then they decided to move then to Ireland, where we are today. So growing up in Ireland for me was all those cultures that my parents had from traveling and the movement, their movement and movement of food that they were eating and feeding us as kids back in Ireland. And I suppose unbeknown to me at the time, I thought this was the norm. Having great food with lots of different spices and exotic fruits and great rice dishes and pasta dishes from Italy and all, and risottos in the 70s. This is what, to me, was a norm. And only as I grew up and started to go to other people's homes and friends and so on, I kind of saw that it wasn't. But what got me then really, really interested in food and on a global scale and also on a national scale here in Ireland was that when my mother prepared dinner, mainly on a Sunday, it was a big family dinner. With that meal that she prepared, it sparked a memory. And it sparked a memory and a story of her travels and my dad's travels on where they have been, where they first ate this dish, and how this memory was always a good memory and they wanted to share that with us. And I suppose the movement of food allowed them to do that. And that got me thinking. I was at a very young age whereby I hadn't started my travels, but I thought, so if what I'm being fed is influenced by the movement from my parents, what about people that haven't moved? So what about people within Ireland, and what is their food? Like, what is Irish food? You know, what are we eating today, and what part of it comes from our culture? And I suppose, speaking of the past, we've got to go back. I'm going to give you a very short lesson on the history of Ireland and going back to look at that. So Ireland being geographically where we are on the side of Europe, and we've had many kind of invasions and so on, and it started thousands of years ago with the Celts, and that then came the Vikings, and then came the British, and we've gone through all these different movements of people and also food and cultures within our country. And there was one thing that sparked a huge change within Ireland, and this is back to the 1600s, when what was, I suppose, in modern day terms, we would call a superfood arrived on our shores, and that was the potato. The potato arrived in the 1600s to Ireland and was seen as a superfood for the reasons being that it was very cheap, and it could grow very, very well in our climate and our rich soil that we have in Ireland, and a small amount of land would yield a very, very high crop. So this was a favorite throughout for a lot of poor people that couldn't afford other foods here in Ireland. This became a staple diet. And before that, when we look back in history, before the potato even arrived, a lot of what was Irish food was grains, more so the likes of barley, which was accompanied then with vegetables, and depending where you lived, would be shellfish, seaweed, and so on. A lot of people did keep livestock, but not to eat. It was more around the production of milk and cheese. And it was only in later years that they developed into eating mainly pork and beef and so on. So when the potato arrived, this was a godsend. This became a staple diet for everyone in the 1600s. Little did we know then that this one crop was going to shape Ireland to what it is today, and was going to turn Ireland on its head, and for all that from one crop that came obviously from America. So fast forward into the 1800s and the mid 1800s, 1845 to be exact, was when a blight hit the potato crop. This blight had started in North America, had traveled into Ireland and onwards into Europe. It affected Ireland the most because we were so dependent on this crop. And this led to a famine, a huge famine that went on into the 1850s. So from 1845 up to about 1851. And it was worth noting at the time, when we talk about food movement and food travel, that during the famine in Ireland, Ireland did have other food and did produce other food. This food was heavily guarded and moved to England for people to eat in England. So while people in Ireland starved and died from starvation and other illnesses from starvation, I suppose there was more resources spent on the British Army protecting the other food that we had to export and move to mainland England to eat, which kind of shows that movement of food, the power that this has. So throughout the famine, this is when movement started in Ireland. And over the 5 years, the famine, the blight hit the potatoes for 2 years. The third year, people didn't grow potatoes because of it. So starvation continued over 5 years. 1 million people died in Ireland through starvation. And then the key thing was when Ireland started to emigrate. So over 2.5 million people left the shore of Ireland during this time. And this started I suppose the journey to where Ireland has become today. This started huge migration to which Ireland has never really recovered. If we look back even as far as the 80s, living polls would show that we had a population of about 3.5 million in Ireland in the 1980s. Before the famine, we had a population of over 8 million. And we often joke about that. There was more people, Irish people living outside of Ireland than actually live in Ireland. And if they were to return as an island, we would sink. But that's how much Irish people have moved through the power of one crop and through the power of a crop failing that caused this movement. And this continued on right the way through, where our population never really recovered. But then something amazing happened. And this is very, very recent, where we look back as far as, say, 20 years ago. And for the first time ever in Irish history, more people have come into Ireland than have been leaving. So it's been a constant trickle of people leaving Ireland, right back from the famine, right up until 20 years ago, where for the first time ever, more people started to come into the country. And this has brought a whole diverse food culture, which is brilliant, into Ireland. And myself and JP were talking about it last night. I think it's over 1/5 of the population in Ireland now are non-Irish people. And what's that? I suppose how looking at Irish food and how it's come and shaped Ireland today, for me personally, it's made me go full circle, because growing up in the 70s and 80s and eating food that my parents prepared from their travels throughout Africa, Asia, and so on, that food wasn't available then, and I was looked upon maybe as being kind of strange food I was eating and so on from home. But now that's readily available. So this whole movement of food has shaped Ireland into what it is today, and the power of to show you that how one crop can totally turn a country on its head. And I think to bring us to where we are now, it's great to we're going to talk to JB and Ella, because we have two different outlooks from them as well. So JB, as he'll come on in a second, just on Microsoft. JB is from France. He moved to Ireland 20 years ago, and with that, he has a great story to tell about his change, what he brought from France and the influences from France into Ireland to change food culture here as well and add to that. And also Ellie has done fantastic work around refugees in Ireland, and how, I suppose, in Ireland as a government, we have failed with refugees, and we've set up these camps whereby we, I suppose, in some way, we have robbed identities of refugees in terms of their food identity, where they don't have cooking facilities, where they don't have access to food that they're used to, and so on. And I think this really brings home the power of food and the power of movement. And I suppose, to me, the question always is, which moves further? Is it people or food? Because when we think of the power of food moving across history, it has changed every country to make it what it is today. So JP, are you coming in there?
I'm here, yeah.
So would you like to tell us about your story? It's a fantastic story, moving over from France.
So I'm a French chef, traditionally trained, and one sec, video there. I've been inspired a lot from lots of things that happened in France. Obviously, France is first of all, like, I'm from a small town in northeast of France, and the food tradition of there is quite similar to Irish food. Actually, it's full of big family stews, cured meats, lots of cabbages, and being a colonialist country, France has been inspired mostly from North African food, but from Central Africa as well, from Asia, from lots of different countries. And France being a crossroad in Europe as well, it's always been a melting pot of culture. So I grew up in a melting pot of culture, of food, even if I was Frenchly trained in cooking. So my taste buds and my inspirations are from lots of different food culture around the world. And I moved in Ireland in the first waves of migration in Ireland. So that was 20 years ago, when people were looking at you a little bit strange because you were not Irish. And the Irish loved the French anyway, so I was okay, you know. And very, very early on, like I've seen that Irish people were not really ready to change culturally. So I specialized myself very, very early on in trying to modernize old forgotten Irish recipes. I've done lots of research on, and there was not much there. Like there was not much written recipes like old Irish recipes like in France it was. But I found my own way, and I kind of involved as a chef with all my background of French cuisine, of North African culture, and then adapting lots of Irish recipes into my own cooking techniques. So to me, migration of people really made me a more complete chef, and with lots of different influence. I've seen the last 20 years, the Irish food of culture has changed drastically, as Conor said. There's more people coming in Ireland for the first time in the history than people leaving. A fifth of the population is now in Ireland non-national. So in the last 20 years, the Irish culture of food changed drastically, and like 20 years ago, it was very much like they were boiling everything. You know, the boiled meats, overcooked veg, and now it's got a way more rare steaks, al dente veg, and even some of fermentation techniques arrived in some of the restaurants now. But still, it's very, very much based on the same type of ingredients than before. It's always one meat, side potatoes, and given side of veg. So veg is very, very much still not seen as a part of the meal. But so we can see the food culture is changing here, and the question is like, how can we Irish food can get inspired from other countries and from all the people who live here now to have more kind of a sustainable diet, and to have to change a little bit. Like in the last 2 days, really, like lots of people said then they were afraid to lose their food culture. But Ireland as it is, the food culture is not, it wasn't great now, to be honest. Sorry, Conor, like, but, you know, it was not that nutritious, and there was not much respect of the produce itself. And I think some of that food culture got lost, for sure, but in the new melting pot, in the new era of migration of people and migration of culture and the fast pace of internet, I think Ireland is becoming a very better position. People are more informed and are way more ready to do new things. Here at GrowHQ, like in south of Ireland, I'm lucky, like you certainly heard Richard talking yesterday. He's our grower here for the cafe, and I'm cooking more or less exclusively all the vegetables he's growing here. So with all my knowledge of French cuisine and my inspiration of North African food, and being cooking in Ireland for 20 years for mostly Irish people, I need to adapt my recipes. I need to adapt my own culture with the vegetables arriving to out of the garden, and for me to adapt my recipes and my cooking techniques to manage to cook a meal for before COVID. We were feeding over 200 people a day here. So it's I think it's kind of more interesting this way. Like, so now I'm going to introduce you to Ellie. Ellie is from Malawi. She spends many years in direct provincial centers here in Ireland as an asylum seeker. Ellie is a very influential food activist here in Ireland. So hi Ellie, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Hi Conor.
So Ellie, could you tell us a bit where you come from and how do you make your way to Ireland?
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Ellie Kisiombe and I moved over from Malawi almost a decade ago and coming to Ireland to seek political asylum. And I'll be like the first wave of migration, but in terms of coming here as a refugee. So when I was moving over to Ireland, really, it was a time whereby there weren't many people, like many migrants in Ireland. It was like people like me that even when I was coming, I didn't come like as any normal migrant, whether economic or somebody that's come here to study. So I didn't come straight through into a community system. So I seeked my asylum where I found myself in a process of asylum, which is I was placed in a system called direct provision. So because this show is being watched by people around the world, I just wanted to explain a little bit of what direct provision is. So direct provision is a system here in Ireland which caters and provides asylum seekers while their cases are being processed. And the cases for asylum seekers here in Ireland can take from 1 day to actually 13, 15 years, whereby now we have this system going for 20 years. So while you're living in this system, you have limited opportunities. Like the time that I was coming in Ireland, unfortunately, this system was the system that it didn't have much like loosening up for the people that moved over where they were coming from to live there and have like a few basic human rights. One of it could be not even being given a right to work. That means people were not right to work as right to cook. Sorry, because I've carried so much campaigns. So.
but it's true, Ellie. Like you didn't have the right to work neither.
Yeah, you didn't have a right to work neither. So, you know, like, so there was so much like really going on. And even me myself coming from a very political background and also coming to Ireland whereby I've interacted here and there with Irish people and understanding how they flew thousands miles to preach about human rights. I felt like something wasn't really right. Just to look in the context of whereby you cannot allow human beings to actually make choices of food. Anyway, I'm political too, so I can mix up of being a chef, food activist, and a politician. So, you know, like just to not even have a right of being able to go to the market, exercise the right of, you know, like having a therapeutic mentor of being in the market, picking up your ingredients, coming to your kitchen and prepare them. I felt off and I feel like something was really wrong. And one thing we really have to understand is food is politics. Food is political because food is life. Food is everything. Today, 1 week from now, if we can't eat, we can't be able to actually do anything. So food is a major issue of, you know, like our lives. So this is one of the things that I really find it hard in direct provision, that I couldn't even be able to actually cook. So through that, I started like, you know, finding ways of how I could show that, you know, like people needed to be given a right to be able to access food in many levels. So one of the things that I really started was to actually create gardens in every center. So like here in Ireland, there were setups of whereby asylum seekers lived. So we lived in like hotels. So these would be like a military places where it's a military.
Ellie, I think we lost you there for a minute.
I'm sorry. Today they've just been a breaking news. Today they've just been a breaking news about the ombudsman. So I'm on demand like crazy. Like every radio station are looking for me. So yes, I'm sorry about that. So anyway, so through that, so it's when I started the campaign to actually asking the government to give the right to asylum seekers. But I didn't just like start asking this, but I started like actually demonstrating on how the asylum seekers can be allowed to exercise the identity of being able to access food. So I started.
Ellie, tell us what is our table.
So our
Lost you again.
Was actually founded in response to the ban of asylum seekers not being able to work, not even being able to cook. And one of it was to create an environment whereby people from direct provision could come and being able to make their own food. Actually also to meet people from different backgrounds, mainly Irish people, to break bread and also being able to start a conversation. And not only that, as I've actually stated that asylum seekers here in Ireland were not allowed to work. So this was also another part of the way that I could demonstrate to the government to create a space whereby an asylum seeker could ready this organization. I was volunteering too, when I've just got my papers. So anyway, give people opportunities to work and give them trainings, and also being able to actually create employment, which I've actually done for these past years. Yeah.
So tell us, what's the how important for you is to hold on and to share your home food culture?
Food is very, very important. Food is therapeutic. Food is related to mental issues. I'll tell you this. 5 years before the day that I was being able to go into the kitchen where we started our table, when at that time we were just like cooking, not even knowing that this project is gonna grow like the way it is right now. We went in the first kitchen where I brought about 20 men and women from the asylum seeker background. And these people, they've been lived in direct provision for the period of like 1 to maybe 8 years. And these people, they've never even been able to have access to be in the kitchen to cook their own food. That day we talked, we cried. There were stories that people could tell, like food makes people to do anything. Like people started telling stories with tears. And I was like, I was confused, but I still have pictures and recordings of that day. Till now, I try to, food is identity. Food brings who you are. Food makes the culture, the content of the people's personality. That's food. But that day, what happened on that day, it actually made me not really try to understand, like food, it's a powerful tool in a world whereby it needs to be given freely to any human being that lives in this world. Yeah.
Amazing, Ellie. And in our table, in the organization you're running there, how do you manage to cook your food from Malawi with the produce you find here? Do you have to change your recipes, your techniques, or can you find the produce you need?
Yeah, so anyway, I've just had Chef Pinky here from South Africa, which she mentioned about like fusion food. So I'm coming from the southern coast of Africa. So like I'm from Malawi. So our food are more similar. And our food, like I've actually seen a lot of food that's been cooked like from North America, like the guacamole. We have like in Malawi, it's not guacamole. We have the name of it. We have like falafel, which we call them bajila, which the Indian call them bajila, which is very beautiful. So like I've never really twisted a lot of my recipes, but I've actually just continued cooking them with every ingredient that I can actually found here in Ireland. And I've also tried to not even go far away from the food that I've been growing up eating, and I've made it in a way that everyone on the table enjoys it.
I'm going to jump in. I'm sorry, I've got to jump in now. JB, unbelievable, their interviewing and storytelling. Ellie, your energy is unbelievable. We wish we could have you all afternoon. I know you've got calls coming in and, you know, like international, but it's good because what your voice needs to be heard. And I'm so thankful for you having your voice here with us. So over 80 people listening to what you have to say. Very, very important. I think the Irish Hub have pulled together a very, very strong narrative. I'm sorry to cut across you all. We've got a busy day and we've got some amazing speakers to follow what you've just done. Conor, you're going to come back in just a few minutes because we're going to get you to speak to Michael Elegbede on a little conversation around food systems in disharmony. But the Chefs Manifesto has got a bit of an exclusive because we have asked someone from Mexico to dial in, Eduardo Garcia, who is like the most amazing chef. Eduardo and I, we were cooking some brilliant food over in Stockholm a couple of years ago. Hi, Eduardo, how are you doing?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you.
Eduardo, I know it's early in Mexico. I'm sorry for waking you up, but I know you're a chef, so you've probably been awake for a couple of hours.
No, yeah, a couple of hours. Yeah, I just, you know, we just started this with all these things going around the world. Yeah. We just opened Mexico City a few days ago. Right. And so I actually have a brand new restaurant. This is the second day.
Oh my God.
We're busy.
Oh, Eduardo, I'm sorry. I can
No, not at all. I'm so happy that you guys are still, you know, like on this, because the world needs to hear all these amazing stories.
Yeah. Eduardo, I just wanted, when I first met you, I was humbled by your stories, your storytelling, and we're telling over these 2 days stories about the movement of food. And I remember a really amazing thing that you told me about Mexican cuisine. So first of all, I want to introduce you. You can tell us a little bit about your story. But the reason why Chefs Manifesto has asked you to dial in was that you told me that Mexican food is so unique and has such a heritage, has a position of heritage in the world, because Mexican food has not been influenced by or has any other ingredients other than the ingredients that it uses. Every other country in the world has had a tomato or basil or chili or pepper or sugar or whatever, but Mexico has hasn't had the movement of food like the rest of the world has had, and has managed to retain its identity. And I thought you could tell us a little bit more about that, because that's very, very interesting to have a heritage cuisine, and the only heritage cuisine in the world. And when you told me that, I had to stand back up again because I fell over because it was so interesting. Eduardo, so tell us a little bit about yourself, but then also the rich heritage of Mexican food.
Yeah, so my name is Eduardo Garcia. I am from the center of the country, a state called Guanajuato. I actually grew up in the U.S. as a migrant worker. My family moved to the States in 1985, and I grew up picking fruits and vegetables. So I actually got deported in 2007 and came to Mexico, a country where I didn't really know. I always thought Mexico was this country where all these problems and all this, you know, crime and people were, you know, just not nice. But when I came, I realized it was a country full of so much culture, and what keeps it together in the food world is this like indigenous country that's kept together for so many hundreds of years. I mean, you still have places here in Mexico where the people that live in these villages have like zero influence with the outside world. Maybe, you know, like a Coca-Cola here and there, but they still, you know, are cooking with wood. They are still making everything from scratch, like they've been doing for hundreds of years, and that's what it's kept this whole this huge food culture together. And what's so amazing is that a lot of the young chefs are rising now in the country are embracing that. That's what's so amazing, that they are looking back into the past and bringing up all these like amazing stories from villages. Because what happens in Mexico as far as like food goes is so unique, because if you go to a village, first of all, is the second country in the world where there are more dialects, meaning that there's a lot of different types of indigenous people living throughout the whole country. So everybody has its own unique way of cooking one ingredient, just one simple ingredient. And if you go to a village and you go to someone's house and have, let's just say, a mole, which is a very common dish in traditional Mexican cuisine, you could go just next door. You don't even have to go to the other village. You can go just next door to Miss Gonzalez's place, and it would be so different. Because here, people, when they wake up in this country, they always wake up thinking about food and thinking about what they're gonna eat at the moment they set foot on the floor, you know?
Yeah. And Eduardo, yesterday we had some really interesting discussions around the history of the movement of food around the world. And we were talking about this sort of the Colombia effect, or the Central South American effect, which was, you know, tomatoes, chilies, fruits, vegetables, all leaving South America and heading to different places around the world. But what I found was so interesting that some of the cuisines in South America, but particularly Mexico, was not influenced by the movement of food, and has retained a knowledge and a cultural identity that is so rich and identifiable as Mexican. It's such an interesting, can you talk about the heritage of the food in Mexico and how you haven't been influenced so much by movement?
Well, first of all, the country is, before the 1994 food trade agreement with the US, the country's economic was agriculture. So people lived around food. They've always lived around food. Food has always been like a huge part of a Mexican culture and its economics. After the 94 trade agreement, a lot changed. A lot changed because we started importing a lot of food from other countries and exporting a lot of food. But when you go to some of the rural parts of Mexico where tradition has kept, people don't get influenced by other cultures. If you go to the coast of Mexico, Mexico it's practically surrounded by oceans. We have a frontier in the north, frontier in the south, two bordering countries, Belize, Guatemala, and the north, the US. We are practically surrounded by oceans. We don't need to be influenced by other countries' food, because the country is so vast when it comes down to ingredients. If you go to the good thing about it, if you're growing tomatoes in Mexico, if they don't grow in the middle part because it's the winter, they'll get them from the north, they'll get them from the south, they'll get them from the east, from the west. It's the way we have seasons, but we really don't, because we can just get anything from any other state that's bordering, let's say, Mexico City, where I am. I could get any type of fresh ingredient, whether it's winter and fall. It's just going to come from other places. I think what keeps our food so unchanged is this like this pride that people have when it comes down to cooking. You know, it's a little bit it's changing a little bit, but it's a lot of machismo going on in the kitchens in countries like ours, where women are the ones that are supposed to be in the kitchens. You know, it's been that. So change is very limited. Like, they don't like change. If you change something, if you change an ingredient in a dish, it's very hard for them to actually change. So in the kitchens, in people's homes, you're gonna always find that their food has always been the same, and it might change a little bit where maybe the mother taught the daughter how to cook something, and maybe she changed it a little bit, but that's gonna take 20 years to just change something that she's been cooking, for her whole entire life.
It's interesting, Eduardo, because, the experience I've had of traveling through different parts of Europe and different parts of the world is that, quite a lot of the cultural identity and the culture of food is carried by the women's knowledge, and it's passed down, from mother to child, I mean, I hope I don't want to start an argument, but that's how I've seen really the knowledge of food and culture is coming through the feminine energy in the kitchen. And you're saying that the women in Mexico, they don't want to change the recipe because it's what their mother showed them, it's what their mother showed them before, and the ingredients are there, it's all delicious. And that's the same in Italy. I mean, I've experienced the same thing in Italy. So culture exists as an identity through the connection of the feminine to the planet. Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say here in Mexico, you see it throughout the whole country. It's almost like a ritual. It's almost like it's an essence. The way people see it in Mexico, it's an essence. It's what like a whole marriage is all about. The way they see it, because here in Mexico, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the dishes, like for instance, mole, we talked about it a little bit ago. It's one of those dishes, it's like traditional for weddings. People want that in their weddings, and it's always like that feminine touch. It's always like the grandmothers made this mole for this feast, for this happy day, Also the ingredients, Mexican cuisine is based on foraging, but it's based on like natural produce ingredient that's grown wild, So it's when you go to certain parts of Mexico and find yourself in a rainy season, you would see that the food changed so much from when the rainy season was not on, because of all the wild herbs and ingredients that are growing, and people are still like in love with those flavors. I think it's super important for people to actually be in love with what they are eating, and that just keeps on for hundreds of years. If you love something so much, it shouldn't change at all.
That's amazing. That's a really important point, Eduardo. Love what you're eating. That's really important. There was also, Eduardo, I appreciate we're pushed for time and you've got a restaurant to run, but there was something you told me that was really interesting about Mexico City and from a long time ago, was that the city itself had floating gardens, and they wouldn't have to travel so far because they were growing so much food on these sort of man-made gardens of soil, but they were floating in water around the city. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm really interested in the energy of a city and how you get food to move not far, be fresh, and available to a big population.
Yeah, so it's so interesting that now with this pandemic, we starting to use this place, this Xochimilco is what you are talking about, which is, Xochimilco is actually 25 kilometers from where I'm standing right now. And the Aztecs made that their gardens, their floating islands. It's where they grew all of their crops, mostly corn and beans and squash. And they would bring that into the city in canoes. But we're talking about this floating islands were built 1,000 years ago, over 1,000 years ago, and they're still there. And we as a new culture of chefs are reviving this place, so that we can get produce from these places from so nearby, because you're talking about one of the largest, the most populated cities in the world. So we need something to be close. We need something to be clean as far as produce goes. And it's an amazing place. It's It's protected by the federal government. It's UNESCO's heritage, and we are trying to keep it alive.
Mm-hmm. So for everybody who's tuning in and wants to listen to a little bit more about the heritage, or understand a little bit more about the heritage of Mexican cuisine, and did you say, what is it called? Xochimilco, Eduardo?
Xochimilco. Yeah,
Okay.
and the floating islets are called chinampas.
Chinampas. Okay, because I think that, you know, having gardens close to cities is important so that food doesn't have to travel so far. Now, yeah. Eduardo, we are so thankful for your time. We really needed South America to be represented in the Chefs Manifesto discussion, because South America has impacted on a global scale food and culture and identity through ingredients. So I know we had only a short amount of time for you, but I really thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully you can stay tuned in. But Eduardo, any last points before we say goodbye?
Well, thank you guys. If you ever get a chance to visit Mexico, please do. Culture, it's amazing. Food's amazing. Everybody take care. We are living some weird moments in life, but we'll get over them and keep on cooking, eat well, and grow your own produce. That's the most amazing feeling you can have in your heart.
Eduardo, we send peace and love to Mexico. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
See you soon.
See you.
So Conor and Michael, please excuse us for this sandwiching of time. We just really wanted to get a South American voice into the Chefs Manifesto this afternoon, and we had to push the break and push you a little bit, but don't worry, you still got your time, because this piece is really important too. We were talking a few days ago, Michael and Conor, about two different points, but actually the points that you brought together were so identical that food that's being produced in both Ireland and Nigeria sometimes is overproduced, exported, and you're importing foods. And it seems to be crazy. It's like this dystopian position that we're in, and completely dysfunctional. But I thought the two of you could have a conversation about what Ireland's going through with overproduction, what Nigeria's going through with production of food, and from a chef's perspective, how is that impacting, or what we can do to change it, or innovate, or influence in that spectrum. So hello to Michael, everybody, Michael Elegbede from Nigeria, Lagos, and Conor, who you've already heard. So Michael, Conor, if I could leave it to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thanks, Arthur. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Conor. So you want to tell us a little bit from the Ireland perspective?
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit of a continuation from the talk earlier, where Ireland has become a fantastic, diverse nation for food. But with that comes problems around food here in Ireland. And the statistics, the stats and the numbers at the moment is that Ireland as a nation, we can produce enough food on the island of Ireland to feed double population we have living in Ireland, if not more actually, but yet 70% of what we consume is imported. And to me, there is a total disconnect. While I totally get we are part of a global food system, and there's a lot of things we can't do without. You know, we need our cocoa, our coffee, our tea, our spices, and these are certain foods that of course we want to import. But then it turns out that we export food and import the same food back from a different nation. Like we export a lot of beef and we import beef, you know, and we export a lot of vegetables, but yet the vegetables we import into Ireland are cheaper than the vegetables we're growing in Ireland. And I suppose it's that total disconnect, and I could be wrong in this, but a lot of times I see it as government intervention, where they get involved in setting up, as part of an economy, setting up these systems to export and import food. We're not looking at the sustainability outcome of it and the effects it has. I suppose it was only when we were talking last week, Michael, that there's similar things in Nigeria, and you know, I suppose from chefs, how or what can we do? I suppose.
Yeah. Well, from the Nigerian perspective, I don't think you can talk about food disharmony without talking about colonization. You know, what colonization, you know, anywhere that has been colonized, colonization strips the culture and tradition of the people to instill theirs. And that's really what we're facing in Nigeria when it comes to the types of ingredients that we're driving towards. You know, coming from a culture that, you know, most of what we ate was vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, to a culture where now primarily rice, wheat, dairy, and, you know, some, like a lot of people now want to eat a lot more meat. It's based on the colonial mentality. It's based on the American pyramids of what was perceivably good for you to eat. And this, you know, when you're in a marginalized culture that has been colonized, you're always in many ways trying to adhere to the philosophies and the realities of the colonizers. So there's a lot of education, first, re-educating ourselves in what type of food we should be eating, relearning a lot of our traditional food. And when it comes to the food we're importing and the food that we're growing, we're still growing a lot of the food that we eat in Nigeria. The problem is a lot of the food that are being eaten the most, such as rice and some wheat, are still primarily imported just because other countries are able to have better facilities to grow larger amount for the type of population that we have in Nigeria. So there's a lot of government support to support other countries that we don't have. So there's a lot of political agenda affiliated to this importation of some of the food that we're eating as well. So that's primarily what we're facing in Nigeria. So like, I think for me, what I see as solutions is, you know, an re-education of just not people within African countries. I can speak specifically to Nigeria, but also creating a level of accountability on a global front for people that are producing and exporting food. I think we live in a world where it's very easy for us to be very focused on the realities of our space, our world, without realizing the effect that we're having on other people. Yes, as a country, you want to make money and export a lot of food, but what effects are you having on the countries that you're exporting food to? So we're one of the largest importers of seafood into a country that is like water, that we're on the Atlantic, you know, and you know, we import a lot of pelagic fish from Norway, and a lot of those seafood we have locally, but we just don't have the facilities and equipment to properly harvest in the quantity that we need. So rather than getting a lot of those seafood, a lot of those ingredients from other countries, I think it's very important that if those countries are going to be part of our food system, it's very important for them to invest in the productivity within the country, allowing, you know, a sustainability, allowing a very, very reciprocal trade, if it's equipment, if it's ingredients. Like we produce a lot of prawns in Nigeria. We get a lot of stockfish. All the stockfish that we get in Nigeria is from Norway. So it's and that's a lot of money leaving the country. So using that, you know, as a platform to create a very symbiotic relationship, I think from the Nigerian perspective is very, very important in our conversation of food disharmony within our country and the globe.
And that's brilliant. And I think the effects that I've seen, I suppose, here in Ireland on imports, if I focus on horticulture and vegetable growers, 15 years ago, there was over 600 farms, vegetable growers in Ireland, and today there's 110. So that's how many have closed and haven't had a future in growing food here in Ireland because of, as you said, cheaper imported food coming in, which is identical in terms of what it is, but it's heavily subsidized by governments overseas. And I've always spoke about different food that's heavily subsidized in terms of energy and power, and even the travel to bring that over to Ireland, whereby our own growers can't compete, and it's been knocked out of the market. But and I think you hit the nail on the head, Michael. I think education is where it's at, because if many people, and I don't mean this in a bad way, we're programmed, or we go to a market or we go to a supermarket, and what we buy, we very rarely think of the consequences of that piece of food, be it whatever piece of food it is. And yes, we're told to look for where it's come from, and look, but even that, in terms of sustainability and the future of the food system, has huge effects that we're very unaware of. And it's a very true point that, I mean, choices I know that we make here in Ireland on certain foods that are imported doesn't really affect us. It affects the carbon footprint or the environment of people that have a zero carbon footprint elsewhere in the world. And we affect them more by the choices we're making on bad imported food. And I suppose as chefs, it is about educating and providing that information to kind of change this food system. Yet surely that's very difficult when you have governments behind this that are, for economic reasons, are buying and selling commodities for financial.
Exactly. And, I think you asked about, what our role as chef is. I think, you spoke, in our earlier conversations about how Ireland used to have such a great seafood culture. Nigeria, has a great seafood culture, a great, vegetable eating and legume and grain eating culture. I think our role is to really bring that to light. When I speak of colonial mentality and re-education and relearning in our people, is also when you've been colonized, that the way you look up to the colonizers, you look up to everything about them, because it's an identity shift. Once your identity is stripped away, you're looking to fill it with other identity or whatever identity it is. And what we find is a lot of people in Nigeria, a lot of the food system, a lot of, especially in the most influential part of Nigeria, you find that the perception of food is Western food. So when you have that perception of food within a class that is making the most influence in the cultural perception of food into society, you find that a lot of the growth of the culture is going to be growing towards, bringing in food rather than producing food. Is going to be towards trying to get ways to produce food that people perceive as better, as higher, as greater quality as the ones we have locally. So I think, especially my role, what I do in Nigeria is, as a Nigerian chef, I only use Nigerian produce. And more than use it, I also talk about the importance of the footprint. Eating, we have such a great privilege that we have beautiful lands and to grow food. So biodiversity, growing, more ingredients that we can grow locally, and, using that primarily in everything that I cook. I don't use any produce from anywhere else but Nigeria. And using that and talking about that and talking about the importance of that has been, very, very, I would believe, impactful in the way that we perceive our ingredients and our food. And having other people talk about, when you're able, that's the great thing about representation. When you're able to see your food on diverse platform. I go to France and I go to like a remote village, and my friend's grandmother is making us coq au vin, and it's like a one pot, food that it's just like, it's just a one pot dish. But you go to a chef's restaurant that they're, making coq au vin to talk about what their grandmother used to make, and it's beautiful. It's, you know, it's multi-sensorial. And I think that's what our role as, you know, chefs, especially, you know, speaking to here and listening to Ellie, listening to, you know, Anahita yesterday and seeing what Anahita does, seeing what a lot of chefs in this ethnic cultures do, is bring in awareness to the diverse way you can experience a culture's food. And with doing that and creating more representation, you allow the people to be proud of their food. And that's what you see. You know, it was great listening to Eduardo and hearing him say, you know, Mexicans are very proud of their food. And when you have pride in your food, you have pride in your identity. And that's what we need to create, and we need to push forward where, if we really want to make a change in reharmonizing our food system.
I think that's brilliant. And I think you hit the nail on the head as well. And it's about pride, being proud of what you have in your country and what you can produce from that. And maybe, you know, that's where we need to instill more pride into people, like having these conversations so that they know what is available, you know, what great food is growing in Nigeria, what great food is growing in Ireland, and, you know, that they need to eat it and enjoy it. So, you know, love talking to you, Michael. Cheers.
You know what I've been meditating on though, Michael and Conor, is the fact that there's pride and there's something to be proud of, but there's also the ego. And I think there has to be an understanding that being proud and having pride in your cuisine and where you're from is something that you can carry with you. But building an ego around it can sometimes take away from that. And you see some people walking around going, yeah, well, I know this and I do that. And it's like, no, dude, sorry, but you need to get off that. Be proud and have pride in your product, but don't build an ego around it, which can sometimes be quite detrimental. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. And I think it's a very common flaw with chefs, that they build these ego barriers whereby, you know, rather than sharing great work and rather than sharing ideas and as Michael spoke about, sharing fantastic ingredients, they almost hide it and have these egos that, you know, I did this and, you know, I'm not sharing how I done it. I'm not going to, you know, I'm just going to be the great guy who did it. And I think definitely with chefs, it's about breaking down those barriers and getting chefs to be open and share their work and share their ideas, both good and bad. You know, what has worked, what hasn't worked, so we can all learn from this with an end goal of a better food system.
Michael,
I don't know. I think when it comes to our cuisine and our representation of cuisine, when you speak about, you know, knowing what you have and having an ego about what you have and how you represent it, I'm a little lost in what, you know, you're really trying to say. What does it mean to be egotistic in representing your food and your food identity?
Well, no, I mean, it's quite a lot of the time now, everybody, you know, for example, Great Britain, we're proud to be British. But the problem with that is that it tends to rise a lot of other issues around putting up barriers, saying, no, this is British and only British, or this is Irish, only Irish, this is Nigerian, only Nigerian. Actually, you can be proud of what it is that you do and create, but don't get overly strong with your views that other products aren't good, that the environment that you're in is better than others, and building a strong ego around, you know, being better than. Pride is being proud of.
If that's the conversation you're having, I think more African chefs should be extremely egotistic. Yeah. I think, you know, more African chefs should think that the food from their land is better. I think more African chefs should think their food is better and greater. I think we need to have that level of pride because we've been pushed down so much for so long. We need more of us to be so boldly talking about our food and why it is good for us and why it is better for us as Africans. And if people want to experience it, they can come and experience it with us. But we are going to be proud and we are going to be very egotistic about our food and our culture and our cuisine and our ingredients. because it's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was just more the conversation between pride and ego, and I think that the two can sometimes be quite detrimental for each other.
Well, I think European chefs and American chefs have been extremely egotistic about representing their food and that is why they are the center of attention when it comes to cuisine. So maybe less ego from the European and the American chefs, and maybe lifting, rather than with that ego, lifting African and Indian chefs and, you know, people in the marginalized ethnic groups to stand more and give them a seat on the table.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I think it's brilliant.
There's lots of agreement with the conversation in the chat box at the moment. So it's really great to see everyone jumping in on this. And,
this is the first time that we've really got to the nuts and bolts, Michael and Conor, of a discussion that we want to have. So can we pull this into the chef's discussion in an hour's time? And really
absolutely. Yeah.
Let's talk about it, because we've got other people to talk. We need to get through this agenda, but we do have an hour at the end, Michael, and I want to talk about pride and being proud, and I want to talk about ego, I want to talk about food. Let's do that. Let's do that in an hour. So,
awesome.
Conor and Michael, much respect and big love to you both. We're going to move on because we have to, because we've got such a strong agenda to keep going with. And I'm going to talk about now food movement. We've been talking about migration. We've been talking about people moving. The reason why we're talking about movement is because we've stopped moving. And I want to introduce Jessica Latchford, or Jess, as I know her, and she runs a company called Waste Not. And we're going to reintroduce Anjli, because Anjli's working on some amazing projects in London around moving food around London. But part of my approach to Jess to come and talk today is a little bit about when food stops moving, what happens to it? Does it become waste? Does it stop in the field? Does it stop in the markets? Does it stop in the fridges? And we've all come to deal with having to deal with food waste all the time. It's on everybody's lips. Food waste, food waste, food waste. But where does food waste come from? Is it because it doesn't move? Is it because we have to move better, quicker, faster? You know, all these sorts of things. And I'm going to do a bit of a Q&A with Jess and Anjli. But Jess, hello. I'm going to first introduce you. Thank you so much for coming on and spending your time with us. I know how busy you are. But Jess, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do? And then we'll start the conversation up about waste food and the movement of it.
Sure. Hi, everyone. And Arthur, thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this. It's a really wonderful conversation to be having. So I run Waste Not, and we source surplus and misshapen produce directly from farmers and growers across the UK, and rehome them. They're homeless with fruit and vegetables, and we give them a purpose. And we operate as a commercial business because we value the produce and the work that goes into growing it. So in terms of the movement of it, we are organising the logistics, the harvesting, the packing. We work closely with farmers to make sure that it's all viable for them to do, and equally work with the businesses closely to make sure that it fits into their offerings as well. We work closely with caterers such as Sodexo and Compass, and we offer what we do as a whole package of sustainable initiatives. So it's not just the produce that we are offering to these businesses, it's a whole package of how can your company act more sustainably. And for caterers, it's important because it's so competitive that they need to be ahead of the curve in terms of what they can offer to the clients. So that's why it's got more value, the produce, rather than just a normal, going to a wholesaler and buying carrots because you're making carrots as a side dish. The backstory of the produce that we offer comes with a whole feel-good factor that the corporate companies can use to talk about the environmental issues that we face as internationally and nationally today. So we also work with charities. So we've been working with FareShare since
last July, and got all the logistics in place to be able to supply them directly. And since lockdown, all our traffic shifted from any business that we were doing to purely supplying charity. And it's enabled by the charities having funding, which enables the commercial interaction. So it's on a cost neutral basis for the farmer, but it just means that food isn't being wasted and it's getting to where it can be used. And talking to charities, good fresh produce is what they lack the most. They get fresh produce, but it's not necessarily the best quality, or they get dry, sugary, full of salt products instead. So to be able to get this type of produce into charities and to people that need it is really important for us as well.
Thank you, Jess. And Anjli, could you share with us the project that you were working on specifically? We talked about this morning. It was moving food around London to people, and was it specifically waste food? Am I right?
Yeah, it's a surplus food. So like I volunteer with a couple of organisations. So one of them is like Felix Project, and Felix Project prior to COVID would take surplus food from high street retailers such as Pratt or any of the other ones, and take their sort of still fresh but packaged food and then sort of supply it to supported accommodation or different hostels. But what's been really interesting in the last 3 months is that because the high street has been closed, there hasn't been any sort of pre-packaged produce. So even though a lot of the times, you're like, well, how are people going to get fed? What's been happening is that wholesalers have had surplus produce. And I was speaking to Jess about this on Saturday, actually. This is surplus produce that has been considered second or has been rejected from the end buyer. So it's been given back to them, and it's been paid for to the farmers. So it's surplus for them. So they give it as a donation to charities. But what's been great is that now a lot of these assisted livings or hostel situations are getting better quality of food and actually having fresh food cooked on site, which prior to COVID wasn't really an option. So most people are getting fresh meals. A lot of places are getting fresh meals every day because they've had to cook produce. So that's been quite an interesting.
So that's the Felix project, and the other project was.
The other projects were just some sort of. I was in Leicester for 3 months, sort of shielding with my parents, or shielding them, as it were, but supporting local food drives and cooking and dropping food off to people that were shielding through this situation or in vulnerable health spaces. But a majority of this was done through waste. So like collecting, let's say families that were buying food during this period were buying too much. So you'd go to people's houses and say, what will you not get rid of this week? And you would do a collection, and then that would go to a local depot, and that would be cooked and then redistributed and left outside in parcels outside someone's house. So I think from a consumer perspective, there was more attention to what people have been wasting on a home level. Because they're seeing it, they're being presented with it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, thank you, Anjli. So, I really wanted to now just open up and discuss, food. It needs to move. And if it doesn't, how can, it sounds like there's a number of charities getting involved and being supported by companies that can move food. Because this afternoon we want to talk about logistics and distribution and movement, and we've got people following this discussion today now with movement and how it moves both locally, in Leicester or around London or around the UK, but then we're going to go talk about global movement of food. So Jess, waste not in its, if I can just take a sort of very simple point of view, it's food that potentially could go to waste. It's moved then, because I remember the work I was doing with the People's Supermarket years ago, that if it looked like waste and it was a bent carrot or a funny pepper or a dodgy cucumber, it would just be left behind or just thrown away or sent to landfill. And I know we've moved on 15 years, but at the same time, if we don't pay attention to food that could definitely be eaten and move it to where it could potentially be cooked or eaten, then it's going to become waste. Is that true? Is that how you started? Is that the thought?
Yeah. So I started Waste Not because I saw how much was actually being wasted. I used to work for a farm, and we would supply restaurants, which is where I know you from. And we would work with small farmers, and I realised that they would grow so much more than they actually needed to, and it was just so that they got the right spec, and it just didn't add up, because then I saw what happened to that produce if it wasn't harvested, and it was either sent to landfill, burnt, sent to anaerobic digestion, or sent to pig feed. But it was usually left in the ground just to rot, because in a way you're putting nutrients back into the ground. So of all of those, it's probably the best for the farmer, because cost wise it's not going to make any difference to them if they send it for landfill or whatever else. The most cost efficient is just to leave it. So I knew that there was a massive swathe towards doing the right thing, really. I think the more conversations I had with chefs, it was all about what can we do? Because I think with agriculture, the farmers, they get a pretty hard end of the deal anyway, in good times. So it's one of those things that we look after each other, and one of these mentalities of we need to respect each other and have that connection of chef farmer, so that relationship is respected and the process isn't lost. So I started Waste Not because I knew there would be the drive to source this produce if it was on offer, and it just hasn't been on offer before. So having spoken to a few chefs, I was right, and everyone was really keen to get on board. So it sort of happened quite organically and quite fast. I'm not going to say I planned any of it, but it's gone the right way, and it's really quite humbling to see that inherently people want to do good if they have the opportunity to. And I think with everyone being, well, not everyone, but people who are on that page, it's been not easy. I think logistics is the biggest problem that everyone faces, and especially with the subject that we're talking about, logistics has always been the main sticking point about me finding a farm and a grower who has this unbelievably lovely produce. And we only work with farms who are sustainably minded, so their growing methods are very environmentally friendly, and they want to get their produce to where it can be used, albeit that they won't be out of pocket doing so. So logistically, we had to find routes to make that happen, and through various ways we've done that, which is great. So it definitely can be done, but I would say that there has to be a drive from all sides to make that happen. And another benefit that I've seen from this period of lockdown is a change in mentality of priorities. So I think with the big businesses in particular, instead of it being well, we want to do this, but how do we do it? It's we want to do this, so we're going to do it. So it's been a very much a change in determination to make sure that the right thing is being done and can continue to be being done, despite there being clear logistical barriers in the way.
Anjli, talking about logistics and moving food, just from the human experience of what you did over the lockdown and getting food and distributing food, even before the lockdown, in this sort of charitable sense of getting food to people that could otherwise have gone to waste. Did you find issues with logistics and the actual movement of food? Because it's great cooking it, but you got to move it.
Well, I mean, so as a chef, I've always worked with surplus produce, even when I had my restaurant in India. If the local farm in Goa had done a harvest that nobody had bought, I'd make sure that I bought it from them, and I also harvested from them on a weekly basis anyway. So I think, you know, in India, logistics is a very difficult issue already. But I think with doing a similar process in the UK and working with the suppliers, I think I've actually found, from a chef perspective, when you work in conjunction with another actor within our food supply chain and you work towards supporting them, they will also support you. So working with suppliers that I worked with and said, look, on a weekly basis, what do you have for the next 4 days that's going to be surplus or that's going bad? Just tell me what you have, and I can keep, you know, I use the Pareto theory, which is like, you know, give 20% agility to my menu planning to ensure that I can support them and buy that produce from them. So that allowed my team to be creative, me to be creative, but to ensure that, you know, somebody's getting paid as well and nothing is going waste. So in that respect, I was using the same sort of logistical pipelines of the food getting to me. You know, and that was all. And I run a zero waste supper club as well. So my delivery routes for that are on their same daily plans that they would be. I let them drop it in a location, then I pick it up from there, or they drop it on site. But from the volunteering perspective and getting, you know, feeding people who are in, you know, dire need of food, I feel like the organizations and also local governments and councils have supported it really, really well. Like the Felix Project is supported incredibly well across London. You know, you know, it's a two-way dialogue between sort of local borough councils and the Felix Project, because they know that the end feeling is to ensure that that person is not going without food. So I think when we can see the impact and the human impact at the end of it, whether it's at the home level or at the commercial level, that's when you start to see the change.
Yeah, absolutely. Jess, have you seen any support or had any support? I appreciate that businesses are supporting you, and chefs are focusing and understanding that there is an importance in taking the product that you're finding and moving to them. But is there any kind of support from local councils or government level which say, we really need to help with logistics on this?
I think that, well, as I said before, we're a commercial enterprise. So by nature, we don't necessarily fall into sort of any, I don't know, council, government funding as such. But I would say what has been good is the funding that has gone directly to the charities that has then enabled them to source the produce from us, from the farmers. So indirectly, yes. And I would say that one of the caterers that we supply has been offering grants to SMEs that they work with, as well as offering help in terms of their, if SMEs have got any apprenticeships within their company. So I think as much as we can look to government funding to help, it's quite important that for a sustainable economy and a sustainable business, we look to it commercially as well. And as far as we're concerned, for us to keep going and for the farmers to be on board, it needs to have that premise behind it. Yeah, I think as far as support, I mean, logistically, we're lucky, lucky, it's worked that way, that the farms we work with have their own sort of transport network. So in terms of moving food, we don't add any carbon footprint. We're always piggybacking off the back of lorries that are going around the UK anyway, be that to a wholesalers or directly into depots, which are then going to deliver to units for a caterer. So I think logistically, we had the setup in place before COVID hit. So we weren't necessarily looking for any of that sort of support, which I know a lot of kind of solely government funded charities have had to.
Okay. Now, Jess, I know you've always been way ahead of the curve on waste food, and it's just fabulous to be able to have you speak at the Chefs Manifesto, because, you know, waste is on the lips of every chef. How do we reduce it? How do we write about it? How do we get it into our menus, etc.? But what should we, Anjli and Jess, in the next couple of minutes, talk about? What should we as chefs and the general public, but chefs in general, be looking at for the future, and how to engage with waste food and make it more apparent on our menus and support waste initiatives and the movement of food that shouldn't be going to waste?
Well, I think from someone who has had experience supplying into restaurants rather than actually working in a restaurant, I would say, and what I've seen from running Waste Not, the best thing to do is just to be flexible. And this is what I'm seeing everyone now saying. So we only source UK produce, although I know it's a global problem. At the moment, we are only sourcing global UK produce rather than internationally at the moment. So we have quite, as you know, as a chef, the seasons are limited at times. However, I think it calls for flexibility to be able to work with what is surplus. And as Anjli said before, when she had her restaurant, working with what was available as surplus rather than defining a menu and then saying, right, can I have that? It's the other way around. And we always talk to chefs as it being farmer-led. So you look at what the farmer's got and you develop your menu from that rather than the other way around. So that's what I'd say the most as an outsider of a restaurant trade.
Okay, so chefs need to be more flexible. Does that mean we all need to start up yoga? Conor, I think you and me need to be in a yoga class for flexibility.
Yeah, can we have a demo after actually?
Chef yoga, more flexibility in kitchens. Anjli, a little bit of a crystal ball. What do you think, futuristic, and how to move forward?
I think, you know, like, for example, like, there are some amazing examples just within the Chefs Manifesto themselves. Like, there's like Chef Radhika, Chef Conor, that are constantly working on creating like dynamic, innovative recipes with what we consider to be daily household waste, whether it's your banana peel chutney, whether it's taking your like watermelon and, you know, frying the watermelon skin up with some onions and some spices and making a curry. I think, for me, I think just from a cultural perspective, waste, growing up in an Indian family, we don't really have this idea of waste culturally, because everything as an ingredient is fed into something else. So even living in India, steep, you know, societal hierarchies, but somebody always gets your leftover food from a family perspective. So I think there's an education piece that we've been talking about, which is if a chef at a kitchen perspective is handing over food to a consumer, they have a role in educating that consumer on where that dish came from. So if it is from surplus food, if it is from juiced waste matter, it is a cracker from your kale, your kale stems, then educate your consumer at that point of, this is where it's coming from, isn't it cool? And kitchens and restaurants and hospitality has a really important role in making waste sexy, and not making it a horrible word, because that's what I think waste is a horrible word, and we need to sort of redefine it.
Yeah, we need sexy waste.
Yes.
Right, we're gonna wrap this up, but you know, we could talk again about the movement and how to get food out of the field and onto a plate and not have it thrown away. Can I just ask for a little wrap up from you both? Jess, would you like to say a few more points before we go?
I just think it's such an important topic that we need to focus on. I think food waste has been on the agenda for over a decade now, and I think there've been some big movements made and some real inroads into how we measure waste and how to tackle waste. like Anjli said, I hate the word waste. We tend to use surplus because waste has quite negative connotations. But I think in terms of moving forward, we need to just rewrite the rule book a bit and just think outside the box and see how we can do things differently and better and more sensibly. Really, it just makes sense to use produce that would otherwise go to waste instead of letting it rot. And when you get back to the basic founding principles of what makes sense and what seems a little bit silly, doing the right thing isn't really that hard.
Thank you, Jess. I really thank you so much for joining us. Anjli, final point?
Martin has just mentioned a point which I was just going to say. I was going to say there are so many chefs doing really amazing things with waste food, and like Doug McMaster, he's just setting up the Zero Waste School. So I think there is a lot of education out there. And if you're a chef and you don't know what to do with waste, I think ask your fellow chef friends that do, and they will help you, because I think there is there's no ego, nothing to be embarrassed about. There's only stuff to learn and cool ways to do things.
That's right. There is no ego, only pride. We're going to talk about that in an hour. I've got to move on. Paul, thank you, Anjli. Thank you, Jess. So great to see you.
Thank you.
Paul, now we're just going to very quickly run into the interview with Jackie Mcalister. Jackie Mcalister, I'm going to introduce as Paul gets this video running. It works internationally with huge organisations around moving food or buying food from different parts of the world. And so I asked Jackie in New Zealand this morning to tell us a little bit about her experience. So if we could just run this video. This is Jackie Mcalister in Queenstown, New Zealand, who's probably asleep now, but this is a video explaining a little bit about moving food and where to buy it from sustainably, etc. Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much for joining us. I've slightly introduced you already, but now that we've got you almost live from late for this interview, Jackie, we've had nearly 2 days now talking about food, movement, migration, culture, and identity. And you've always inspired me from the work that we did together at IKEA, leading the food, health, and sustainability at IKEA Food. It's brilliant to have you here, and we're going to talk about big agriculture and sustainability and localism. But I thought I'd give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, say hello to everybody. We've got hundreds of people watching. So thank you for joining us from New Zealand.
Okay, thanks very much for the introduction, Arthur. It's a real pleasure to be invited to speak today, so thank you very much for that. And I just want to say before we get started that I think what you guys are doing, chefs getting onto the sustainability of food all around the world in this way, is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful thing to be doing. And so I'm pretty chuffed to be invited along. But just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I've worked in the food industry for many years now. Initially, I worked for McDonald's. I came into the European business there and helped set up their sustainability strategy and team and programs and so on. And then I moved to IKEA Food to head up their global food business, health and sustainability for them, which is where we met. I've since moved on from that, and I'm now back in New Zealand. And I'm working as a consultant to food businesses based in New Zealand.
Fabulous, Jackie. It's brilliant. I'm so chuffed to have you here to talk to us. So I'm going to jump straight in because we've got some big questions, and we've been talking about food now for nearly 2 days. But we're talking about big business. We are talking about business of food on a planetary scale. Because I know all the chefs here, and I know Conor and Michael, and we're all talking about localism, and we all want really good food close to our doorsteps or grown in our own country. But we need to open this conversation up. And so can you tell me a little bit about sustainability on a grand scale of growing food? And is there an optimum place to grow food on different parts of the planet? For example, wheat, dairy, beef, potatoes, and because I know we looked at that. Could you stretch this out a little bit about optimizing sustainable food on the planet?
Sure, yeah. First of all, I would say that I think that the local agenda is a really wonderful thing, and I've been really enthused by it and seeing it emerge and become more prominent, you know, for food businesses of all kinds. And I think particularly since COVID, we've all started to appreciate, you know, even more the importance of sourcing locally and having a resilient supply chain that's local. So I do want to say that in the first instance that, you know, localism is a good thing, but it's not the full story. And I think that if your objective is to source sustainably, then sustainably produced food is a slightly more nuanced thing, and it may involve looking at different origins, different regions which are capable of producing different raw materials better in different ways. So yes, you would find that there are, for example, you know, when it comes to livestock, I think, you know, the interesting thing with livestock is that the paradox of sustainability is that local isn't always the most sustainable. There was a study done some years ago by DEFRA which compared Welsh lamb to New Zealand red lamb, for example. And they found that actually lamb that was reared in New Zealand and made its way all the way over to the UK was 30% lighter in its carbon footprint than lamb that had been reared in Wales. And, you know, that came as somewhat of a surprise because everybody would think, well, actually Wales was, you know, a highly capable and efficient lamb producing region. And certainly it is. But I think the result of New Zealand farmers losing the subsidies back in the 80s meant that they became incredibly efficient. And so there you go. There's a slightly different story there to tell on carbon footprint. And I have to admit that that's been quite narrow about what the focus is. It's really just looking at, you know, what it takes to rear a lamb and what the carbon emissions might be associated with it. And, you know, of course, we're getting a much more complex picture of what sustainability means these days. But, you know, another example that came from that same study actually was that beef cattle raised in the UK had a lower carbon footprint than beef cattle that might be raised in Brazil for a number of reasons. So, you know, there is quite a complex picture that emerges once you start thinking about. And it comes down to multiple factors, really. It could be the region that that something is being produced in, which, you know, there are various factors playing into the sustainability of the food that's being produced, including, you know, things like climate or soil or ability to grow pasture, etc., nutrients in the soil. There might also be things like production systems and practices at the point of origin that are also important. So, you know, it's multifactorial, really.
Well, so, because if we talk, because today, you know, and yesterday we've been talking about migration and movement. So if you're going to grow, for example, livestock in New Zealand, and you're going to, and it's got a better carbon footprint, it's more sustainably, potentially ethically more sustainable too. Although I can't imagine New Zealand being able to compete with Wales because, I mean, they're two, you know, sheep producing nations, right? But so we've produced it and to its optimum sustainable capacity. Now we've got to move it. And does it make sense to move it? I mean, does it lessen the impact on the planet because moving it isn't as detrimental as growing it in the wrong place?
So they found that, yeah, that's exactly right. You know, the myth of food miles when it comes to livestock has certainly been discredited. And because there are so many factors that go into producing livestock on farm, and that's where the majority and the magnitude of the impacts really lie. So transport actually makes up a very small part of that, transport and refrigeration. But if you were to look at something like potatoes or apples, you would find that actually, you know, it's better to produce them locally. They're perishable crops. The production is relatively standardized. It's not very specialized. So you can produce, you know, apples or potatoes just as well in the UK as you can in New Zealand, for example. And what you might find there is actually, it's not even the production. You have to look at issues such as the transport and the refrigeration and storage of those crops to understand really where the environmental impact is. So when it comes to potatoes and apples, then you've got a really good argument for, you know, buying things in season and and a local agenda, not transporting things very far.
And does that then lead us, so if it's, let's say, for example, meat production, does that go hand in hand with dairy production? So does it benefit us to move dairy around the world, or should that be more localized?
I think dairy is also another example, but it's a slightly trickier one because, you know, with dairy, you're producing quite a high volume of milk. So the same efficiencies can't be gained as you can with, you know, a sort of a set amount of meat per animal that comes per animal. So I think the variations in dairy production would similarly be there, but you know, because you're condensing it all into, you know, some cheese, for example, it's much more difficult to say that, you know, because you're sort of, what I'm trying to say is you're dispersing the environmental impacts across a much greater amount of milk, and so it's not so pronounced as it might be with meat.
Now, I remember our time at IKEA, you went off and did some amazing work. I think you went to China and looking at crayfish and things, but I know that you looked specifically at salmon. And rather than go into details of how companies buy and sell it, but it was more the production of salmon. In Norway, I think, Norway is a huge producer of salmon. And you have these big salmon farms, and there's fish farms in Greece with different types of sea bream, and you know, so there's now fish farming going on in different parts of the world, and it's then being shipped. Should we be growing fish in different parts of the world and keeping it local, or is this another global movement of food?
Yeah, well, it is really quite specialised producing salmon, and there are certain climates that suit it and certain climates that don't. And I am specifically talking about farm salmon when I do this. So we were sourcing, when I was at IKEA, we were sourcing from Norwegian salmon because it was Nordic salmon that we were trying to sell, but also it had certain advantages over salmon in other parts of the world. For example, there was little or no antibiotics that went into the production of it. There was, they had reduced the fish in the fish feed to such an extent that they had a mostly vegetarian diet. So there was no concerns over exploitation of fish stocks to go into the salmon feed. And then, you know, you get the advantages of, you know, the fact that they're in, the fish are in cooler waters, which means that they're less susceptible to things like lice. So overall, that was a decision that was partly based on quality. But you look around the world, you've got, you know, South America, Tasmania, New Zealand, parts of Canada and the US, who also all produce salmon. And you need to take a closer look at their production practices to really understand where it is that you might want to be sourcing from. You do still have the impact of transport, which would be, you know, relatively high. But if you look at, you know, factors such as animal welfare and, you know, the others that I've just mentioned, then quite often you might be swayed in favour of another point of origin. Salmon is a really interesting industry because, you know, we're now seeing the emergence of technology around it, and you've got inland systems being developed, which where salmon are being grown indoors. And I would argue that at this stage is yet to prove itself. It is environmentally, you know, fully circular. You know, because they're sort of circulating water from the sea and it goes back out when and it's filtered, and those sorts of things. You know, so it doesn't have the same impacts on the environment as some would argue that salmon does when they're raised in fjords and so on. But there are issues, I think, around, you know, potential issues around the welfare of those fish because they're being kept in much closer quarters. And so it's a very different type of system when you compare to a system that's at sea. And of course now, We're seeing developments that go further. We're looking at open sea pens to avoid the detrimental impacts closer into shore for salmon farming. And I think this is a really exciting opportunity that we see emerging from the salmon industry. So that's really a discussion that is yet to be settled. But I think that the provenance of where you're sourcing from is incredibly important when it comes to something like salmon, even though it's not actually a very high impact raw material when you compare it to other animals.
It's interesting too that you bring up that point, that it's not just about the fact that it needs to be farmed in the right place or it needs to be shipped, but as chefs, we need to make sure the food we put on people's plate is good for them. And if you're going to take animal husbandry, non-use of antibiotics, practically vegetarian diet, non-impacting on the fish stocks in the sea, suddenly, as chefs, we need to make up our minds about, well, what type of fish production or meat production or potato production do we aim ourselves at and try to influence and innovate in? Because if we know there's good animal husbandry and there's no antibiotics and there's no growth stimulants and there's no colorants or at least natural colorants in the products, then suddenly you say, well, actually, I might go with a Nordic salmon, although I'm in, a part of the world where I don't have that available to us, but I could buy it if I wanted to. So I'm making a choice to buy a product that moves quite a long way and probably has an impact on the planet to some degree, but less impact on people's bodies. So there's a real swing between what's good for you, what's good for the planet, how far do I move it, and better practices. I mean, I would suggest that, really good animal husbandry is one of the practices that you have to look at and then perhaps move the product to you rather than bad practices more local to you.
Well, you're right. And, there's so many good points that you're bringing up there because this is such a multifaceted argument. And nutrition is a really important aspect of decisions around sourcing, although the science isn't quite there yet. So we're waiting for that to emerge to become, so that we can understand it better. Is regeneratively produced food or organically produced food that hasn't used any chemical inputs, is it more nutritious than the conventional alternatives? And you also mentioned animal welfare, which I think is a really important point, and one where chefs can actually have a big role to play. You just need to think of, for example, the waste that's in the dairy industry, and particularly with cull dairy cows, particularly also cull calves, because they're male, they're not sort of used in the dairy industry, and that's where chefs can really sweep in and make a really interesting meal, spotlight veal as an interesting and delicious food to be eating. And I think the same thing when it comes to the chicken and hen industry. We've, over the years, we've managed to sort of select the genetics for these birds so that they either produce eggs or they produce meat. And why don't we go back to the heritage birds, which are often dual purpose birds that we can use, both for egg production and meat production. There are some compromises involved, but it's we don't have the same sort of level of waste as you might consider you have if we just go down the route of only eggs and only meat. So there are lots of debates in here that it would be really interesting for chefs to really shine a light on and show people that there's another way of doing things.
It's interesting too, Jackie, that we say that it's more efficient potentially to move fish or meat or lamb, for example, around the world because it's better produced, better animal husbandry, more efficient, more sustainable. But we're now looking at a planet that's we're looking at parts of the planet that are focusing more on plant-based meals, plant-based menus. There's a lot of work going on around, plant-based meats or proteins, non-animal proteins. If we're going to look a little bit to the future, and we can come to the future in a minute, but I just want to talk a little bit about the direction that certainly Europe and hopefully America are taking, that if it's a more plant-based diet, therefore we're not moving meat around the planet more because we don't need to look at sustainability anymore. We need to look at maybe a more localized vegetable option in our diets. what would your thinking be around that? Should we localise our vegetable production, not move it, keep vegetable proteins close to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons to source locally when it comes to vegetables and fruit, and particularly, you know, to source in season, because that means that you're not going to be accounting for, you know, refrigerants and storage. It also means that, you know, you may not need glass houses to be able to produce it. And it sort of directs you towards a finite palette of what you should be using. And then, you know, that's where local cuisine comes into its own, because you're using local ingredients, you know, in the New Nordic diet or the Mediterranean diet, or, you know, those sorts of things spring to mind. You can cultivate a really interesting cuisine by locally sourcing. Although, and I do think that the plant-based agenda is a really important one for both sustainability reasons and health reasons. There's absolutely no doubt that we eat too much meat. But I think also we shouldn't underestimate the potential for the livestock industry to farm in ways which are sustainable. And there's a lot of excitement around the world at the moment, particularly about regenerative agriculture. And we're seeing, you know, opportunities through grazing practices, you know, on pastures where you can't grow crops. So you are utilizing pasture to convert that into something that's able to be consumed by humans. And we're finding that with different methods of grazing, or by introducing species of different grasses, there are a number of different opportunities available through regenerative farming. We're finding that, you know, carbon can be sequestered under the soil, so you can build up the organic matter, you can improve the nutrients in the soil, you can improve the microbial interactions in the soil, and that leads to healthier soils, it leads to healthier livestock, because they're consuming better pasture, and you're also able to do things like you know, retain water better, so you reduce the runoff from farming, and that, you know, in turn pollutes waterways. So we're having, I think, a real paradigm shift in the livestock industry, particularly around this idea of regenerative agriculture, which I think will rival the plant-based movement when it comes to sustainability. But, you know, what people might decide to do for their health is a completely different question. But, you know, certainly eating less meat is, no one's going to disagree with that.
Jackie, we're coming to the close. It's so quick how this time goes. But I wanted to look at, we've got chefs sitting here enthralled by what you're saying. I know they are. But, you know, what do we see as the future? You know, chefs are always looking to push and support, you know, agriculture, food production. Are there any tips or tricks or things that we should be looking at as chefs to say, well, what does the future of movement and migration of food mean to chefs?
Well, I think what's really exciting about chefs is that, and your leadership around this whole agenda, is that you have the opportunity to showcase sustainably produced food and really speak to people in a different way, connect with people through food, which, you know, isn't what I'm not able to do just sitting here, you know, chatting to you now necessarily in the same way. And I think that recognizing that the way some people are farming can be just as beautiful and as artful as some of the culinary creations that you're serving up in your restaurants, and trying to shine a spotlight on that so that, you know, these producers are recognized, that people will recognize them, go to them, they get premiums for their food. I think that doing that is incredibly important. I also think that the future around being creative with what you decide to serve up in your restaurants is also, you know, incredibly important. Understanding in the first place, what problem is it that you want to solve? Because you basically have huge transformational problem-solving power that can change cultures. And once you decide what problem you want to solve, then you can showcase it and profile it and, you know, bring it to the world, essentially. So I would just ask you to be curious, fully research and understand your supply chains and where you're sourcing from, and find the most interesting stories that you can tell.
Jackie, thank you so much. Jackie Mcalister, Queenstown in New Zealand, who will be asleep while this video goes out. But Jackie, thank you so much. And we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, we're moving swiftly along. We got as much as we could from Queenstown, and we're squeezing the juice out of it. We're coming to the last number of speakers in this afternoon of the Chefs Manifesto event. And luckily, amazingly, have John Kriske with us. John, who works with the World Food Programme. John, I really thank you so much for joining us. I know your schedule is super busy. But John, shifting quickly away from Jackie Mcalister on what it is to buy produce, a big business around the world, where best to produce it, where best to ship it, how to move food more sustainably. But your job and role within the World Food Programme is moving food. Can you tell us a little bit about the role that you have and how you move food around the world?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion. It's a pleasure. I feel bad I couldn't sit in for the whole discussion because the last part of it was quite interesting when they were talking about premiums, which we do with smallholder farmers, and sustainable products, which we're doing now with palmolene oil. Yes, I work for the World Food Programme. I'm currently the acting director of supply chain. I've been with the World Food Programme for 27 years. I'm planning to retire this year, but we'll never stop advocating for the hungry poor. We're the largest humanitarian organization in the world. We, on average, feed 100 million people every day in over 80 countries. We're voluntarily funded, and we are well funded. The generosity is quite at a good level for the World Food Programme, basically from donor governments and private sectors. We raised about $8 billion last year, and of that $8 billion, only 6.5% goes for administrative fees, while the remaining amount is spent on beneficiaries. Last year alone, we bought 4.4 million metric tons of food. Got a few comparisons here to give you an idea of what these numbers mean. It's equivalent to 305 Leaning Towers of Pisa. Gives you an idea of what magnitude we buy at. We deliver food in all modes, you know, whether it be by air, land, or sea. Last year, we flew over 20 million kilometers with our aircraft. That's 52 times around the globe. What we've been doing during COVID, we've probably broken that record mid-year through, because we were basically the only ones that were flying during the lockdown, the real heavy lockdown period, let me call it that. And we were one day the largest airline flying in the world. So it gives you an idea. We moved over 60,000 containers, which is equivalent to about 200 Bergedorfs in Dubai, the tallest building. We buy about 400 metric tons of food every hour, which is equivalent to, 266 hippopotamus. But the big number is that by truck, we moved 8.4 million kilometers last year. And that's 209 times around the globe. And just to give you some ideas, at any given time, we have about 5,500 trucks moving around the world. We have 60 vessels at sea moving. And on top of that, we have about 40 planes moving at any given time. The sad part about this story is, with all the generosity that we get from the world and the good intentions, is that 80% of what we spend goes to man-made disasters. These are the areas of, insecurity, high insecure areas such as Yemen, Iraq, Syria, the Sudans, Central Africa Republic. These areas have an enormous need, and the costs are exuberant. So what you see is about 20% of that goes into development, capacity building, trying to bring, you know, the 1 billion people that go to bed hungry every night out of, you know, out of food security, you know, basically making them more food secure. And our biggest call is that we've never had in our history as many L3s, which are corporate emergencies, 8, never in our history, 7 L2s, which are regional emergencies, never of that size. Give you an idea of how big we are, we're about 16,000 on the ground with about 10% of our headquarters, in Rome, and the rest are in the field. That gives you a little bit about WFP. About food, we buy, just to give you an idea of our basket. Our basket is a lot of staple food products, such as cereals. The main cereals are wheat, corn, sorghum, and rice. We buy pulses, different types of beans, chickpeas, split peas, oil. We're trying to move more to sunflower oil and moving away from palmoline oil. And where we're buying palmoline oil, we're trying to buy sustainable palmoline oil. We've moved away from some of the big suppliers who are not sustaining the environment, replanting. We pay a premium for that, but we believe it's a good investment. Further to that, we buy sugar and we buy these special nutritious foods. So how do we move 4.4? Are there any questions thus far?
Well, I wanted to John, is ask you the importance of movement, because it sounds to me as if this machine stops, then people will not just go hungry, they'll die. And the importance of movement and food and machinery and planes and boats and trucks, you're saying, you know, it sounds to me like the WFP is moving food, millions of tons of it every year, and it's so vitally important that I just wanted to bring this, you know, into everybody's mind that, you know, food needs to move in order to feed people, right?
Yeah. And, you know, as I mentioned, we're doing 120 million people. We're doing 100 million people now, but with COVID, the numbers could rise to even 120, 130. So how does it all work? Basically, it starts all on the ground. It starts in our 100 country offices, and basically they work closely with the governments, the different ministries. They work with different foreign governments, you know, represented by their embassies, and we work with NGOs on the ground and different private sectors in the country. And we work very close with other UN agencies like UNICEF, FAO, WHO, UNHCR, depending on the beneficiary type. What happens there is basically there is an assessment, you know, they look at what is needed. There is an assessment called the Food and Crop Assessment. So basically it's done together with WFP and the Food Agriculture Organization of the UN, and what they look at is what are the needs, what is the production, what needs to come in. Based on that is what we look at is we look at what the shortfall is in the country. In some cases, countries are sustainable. They have enough food, but they don't have the transport mechanism to move it. Kenya is a good example. Good harvest in the north, a poor harvest in the south. So a lot of times the donors do come through and move the cargo for the Kenyan government. They're very generous, the Kenyans, giving the food to feed its own people. That being said, is we never buy where we can cause any havoc in the local food supply distribution chain. Let me put it that way. We only buy where there's surpluses. To give you an idea, our big markets where we buy a lot of wheat from the Black Sea region. We buy maize from Tanzania, Zambia, Eastern Africa, South Africa. May have some problems this year and have to go as far as South America because of the GMO issue, because many countries in Africa don't accept GMO. There's only 3 countries right now under WFP that accept GMO products, and that's South Sudan, Yemen, and Ethiopia. All other countries do not want GMO products. So we buy corn mostly in Eastern Africa, if it's available, Sorghum comes from Sudan or India, and rice we buy basically much of it from Vietnam. Our oil sources are Malaysia, Canada, and pulses, a lot of them come from Canada and parts of the Black Sea region. Wheat also we buy in the Black Sea region. Then we have these nutritious products for special feeding programs, which come from different parts of the world. Very sophisticated type of commodity. It's a cereal blend with different soya base, different proteins, different fats. It's, you know, basically hypercaloric to help children lactating and nursing mothers. That gives you an idea where we buy the bulk of our cargo. On top of that, we do have in-kind donors. The United States is one of the largest in-kind donors. They come in with a lot of cereals, pulses, and oil. I would say of the 4.4 million we delivered last year, about 1 million comes from the US in kind. So how does it all work? Well, basically, as I mentioned, is, you know, there is a project document which is drawn up, which basically talks about the intervention the UN will do in the country. When it comes to food, basically the basket's been drawn up with UNICEF, UNHCR, WFP. So we know the commodities we have to buy. With that, we do look at options within the country. First, we look at options within the country, you know, especially if it's capacity building. And we're doing everything we can do to build up a local capacity. We just signed a new food strategy, local food procurement strategy document, where we're giving local farmers a 20% premium. This is to encourage them to buy more. But on top of that, what we're trying to do is we're trying to tighten up the supply chain. What does that mean? Basically, all the transactions within the supply chain before it reaches WFP, we're trying to eliminate them. We will never get to the farm gate. We'll never get to the farm gate. But what we can do is start working with co-ops that have 1,000 metric tons and up. Let us put it that way, rather than buying from the big suppliers like Cargill or Glencore, where at times the farmer is not getting a fair price. So we're doing that, and we're working on that in South America and in Africa. We're working with suppliers also who provide these nutritious foods, and we're asking them also to buy locally produced from smallholder farmers, and they get a premium also, which goes back to the farmer. We do have a rigorous process where we go out and we interview the different farmers, and we also look at what difference this has made in local economies.
John, can I ask you a question then, John? So let's say, for example, and we're getting a sense that food is moving in dramatic numbers, and is moved by the World Food Programme, is a huge organisation and a daily task. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine the impact that this food is having and how it moves around the world. But it's not just food that moves, it's also people. And food is a tool sometimes, and if it doesn't get to the people, then people have to move to it. And there are examples where people have to up and move because there is no food with them, and they have to go to a food source. And the World Food Programme tries to alleviate that. But, you know, people need to move with food. We try to move food to people. But there's a sort of a sway sometimes, isn't there? There's internally displaced people in different countries. And can you talk about a little bit about the importance of getting food to people so that they don't need to move?
Yeah. So just to give you an idea, the World Food Programme is a deep field organization. We don't hand over to ministries. We do deep field distribution together with our NGOs. To give you an idea, in South Sudan alone, we have 1,700 locations where we deliver to. Overall, we have over 50,000 locations. So we try to keep the beneficiaries put. But if they start to move, the food will follow the beneficiary. We will immediately start following the beneficiaries. It's not them that have to follow us, it's us that have to follow them. What we try to do is discourage, you know, large exodus from the field into the cities. You know, it's the making of a perfect storm, you know. It will just disrupt the entire supply chain of all items. On top of that also, you know, to give you an idea is even the donors, especially the European Union, is very sensitive about the basket. They want to give the beneficiaries what they want to eat. They want them to stay put. You know, you've seen some of the problems with migration, so on and so forth. And what they're looking at is trying to give the beneficiaries what they want. I can tell you 2 years ago, we sent milk. We never sent liquid products outside of oil, and we sent milk to the schools in Syria. We also do cash programs on top of that. So we look at different ways, but about the movement, it's not about them following us, it's the other way around. We follow them. Now we try to get in there with big trucks and then smaller trucks. In some cases, we even use airlift, where we reach some of the most remote areas to reach the beneficiaries. So this gives you an idea, depending on the scale. If they're in camps, we can go with large trucking operations, but if they're isolated areas, we go with smaller trucks. And if they're further isolated, in some cases, we even use airlift in order to reach the beneficiaries. Just to add also, we monitor the distribution. All food is monitored to make sure that it reaches the beneficiaries, whether that be with WFP or the NGO. The food is monitored when it's being distributed to make sure that the beneficiaries are fed and it doesn't go off, especially in insecure areas where it's diverted off into some barracks or something like that. So we do have heavy monitoring there.
It's been interesting, John, because we've gone all the way through the history of food from yesterday afternoon. We opened up to the Europeans lifting up out of Europe, heading across the world to the Americas and to the Indies and to the Far East, taking food from there, beginning to move it around the world. You could begin to see this trade and the importance of countries getting rich off all of this. And so it seems to me that food on a mass scale has been moving around the planet for nearly 500 years. And with the movement that you're talking about now is just the sheer scale of movement of food, and people too, but food mainly, is so massive that what do you see that it holds for the future? I mean, we're going to have to kind of wrap this up a bit. We need to sort of tie this up a bit, but what do you see now as this movement? Is it going to continue? Are we going to have to support it in some way?
Okay. Before we get into, I just want to mention something. With all of this, there is commodity management, which is also a specialized field in itself. Different commodities are stored in different areas under different conditions. We're not into cold chain, but we do rent or build warehouses in cool, dry areas, depending on the commodities. The other thing is also packaging plays a big part in commodity management. So I wanted to mention that to give you an idea. We have about 20,000 warehouses throughout the world, and basically we move to primary hub, secondary hub, tertiary hub. You know, funny enough, you know, my daughter did her thesis on food trade barriers and the impact it has on low deficit income countries, you know, food deficit, low income countries, sorry. And if we cannot stop the man-made disasters, it will continue. The SDGs for 2030, while we're all scrambling to try and meet them the way the world is today, we will continue, and the need will continue to rise. You know, now with the pandemic of COVID, it's rising even further. I don't see anything subsiding. On top of that, climate change. Look at this year to give you an idea. Drought in the Horn of Africa, large locust infestation, floods on the other side in West Africa. So the climate change is also having its impact on food production. And it's so fragile in some of these countries that it takes basically nothing to wipe them out. And some of them, you know, basically we have to go in there and give some type of incentives to help them get back on their feet and start and continue to sustain themselves. And this is one thing that the smallholder farmer program does.
But it doesn't look
to say it will continue.
It doesn't look like then, John, that the movement of food is going to stop on this planet. It looks like it's important that it keeps moving. It's important that it gets to people who are at the front line of famine and the issues that are created, man-made issues, as you say. I'm going to ask you just for one last point, but we are going to have to move on and wrap this up. But I can't thank you enough, John, for making your time available to us. Just hearing your story has just been a brilliant ending to what was an amazing beginning. But any last points I could ask of you, and we'll move on. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, all of this could come to an end. It costs about $40 billion a year to wipe out hunger, food insecurity. And if we looked at the G8 plus China, and they were to reduce their military spending by 2%, there shouldn't be hunger in the world. You know, it's something so small that the world leaders have to do in order to wipe out hunger. You know, every year, 6 million people die of hunger, directly or indirectly. While the planet produces enough food to feed its entire population, people still die. People go to bed hungry every night. People wake up in the morning saying, my first chore is to see how I can feed my family and then myself. We take it for granted in the developed world. We get up and we put the toast in the toaster, put the spread on it, and we start eating. We don't think about food. It has nothing to do. We just eat and, you know, we go on with our daily business. Whereas other, you know, 1 billion people every day wake up and say, where's my next meal coming from? Can I give 2 meals to my kids? And I'll eat 1. You know, it's kind of sad what we see today with all the wealth that's in the world. Who knows, maybe it will change. It's kind of sad that what we receive from the generosity of the world of $8 billion, you know, 6.5 billion goes to man-made disasters, you know, which could be overcome. Saying that, I believe we're going to be around for some time. And I thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to even coming to the next discussion. The next discussion, I'll send you a video to play about the supply chain of World Food Program.
John, I just can't thank you enough, and I'm sure we had so many more questions to ask you. I'm truly humbled by your knowledge and the work, and I know you're retiring this year, but this knowledge that you have, it needs to be spoken about. You need to tell people about it. So you can retire, but we still need you on board.
Like I said, I will continue to advocate for the hungry poor. It's in my DNA after 27 years, and try to do my small part to make a difference. It was a real pleasure, and if you need me to sit in on another discussion, I'm most willing. Just let me know.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. Well, we move rapidly on, and it's such a shame to leave John behind. That's been nearly 2 days of discussion around the movement, the migration of food and people and culture and identity. And Carolyn, you so kindly put together a video to introduce this. And we've been running it for weeks, and it's been ahead of each day. And in a way, it's almost impossible for me to sum this up because I'm emotionally connected now. And John's just blown my mind. I'm going to have to go away and really, you know, recover from this. But Carolyn, could you just sort of give us some thoughts on the movement and migration? And we're probably going to go over the 4 p.m. time slot. And I'm afraid if people have to leave, I'm sorry that you have to leave. But please don't, because Carolyn, I'm sure you've got much to say on the subject.
Well, I mean, my mind's been blown as well. I think it's been an absolutely incredible day. I'm so sorry I couldn't be here yesterday. I'm sure it was equally wonderful. And I mean, frankly, just hearing people talk who care about food and who understand food and who want to feed people better just inspires me so much. So yeah, I could probably talk for about another 3 hours, but I'm clearly not going to do that. In fact, I'm just going to literally probably talk for as long as the introductory film I made for you, just to say, you know, so for me, I think the thing that comes across so powerfully in all the conversations we've been having today is the fact that, and Ellie actually said it, food is life. And I often say that, you know, food consists of living things that we kill so we can live. And so it's a complete travesty that, you know, we've evolved an idea of a good life based on the premise of cheap food. There is no such thing as cheap food. I mean, I know everybody listening here knows that, but we live in a society in a world indeed where, you know, the idea is that food should cost, you know, as close to nothing as possible. This is clearly insane. So food is the most valuable thing in our lives. Everything flows from it. I think, again, we've seen that today very powerfully. And, you know, my analogy of a good society is one in which everyone eats well. And as you know, I've just written a book called Sitopia, and I should probably just explain that word to people, because I do find it a helpful word. It just means food place, and it comes from the Greek sitos for food and topos for place. And the reason I invented this word was because, you know, we live in a world that's shaped by food, quite simply, you know, and, you know, it's our bodies, our habits, our homes, our cities, our landscapes, our economy, our politics, everything. And if we don't value food, because food shapes everything, then we live in a bad Sitopia, and that's a bad world. And I think just hearing John speaking now, you know, about the fact that 1 billion people globally, you know, go hungry every day is, and of course, you know, fewer of them do because he feeds them, is just an extraordinary thing. But, you know, Aristotle said that, you know, there is no good life outside society, basically. So, you know, it's no good if I'm having a good life and somebody over there is having a bad one. The only possible conception of a good life is one where everybody is doing well. You know, everybody in Aristotle terms is happy. And for me, again, as I say, the shared meal, I mean, again, Ellie brought this up earlier. I mean, the shared meal is and indeed, Anjli right at the beginning mentioned this, the shared meal for me is the ultimate, it's the most beautiful expression, I guess, of human sharing, because we evolved as a species through the shared problem of how to eat. And if you look at the way hunter-gatherers share food, it's like the first and the best ever economy, because everybody eats according to their need and according to that, you know, the way they're valued by the group. And I think, you know, we've moved such a long way from that. And, you know, in a way, John has brought us back to this. You know, every time we eat, every day, we're eating globally. We eat with everybody else. And important to say, we eat with all other humans on the planet and all other non-humans. Because, of course, you know, the reason why food is so important, and the reason why it's such, I mean, for me, I'm an architect, you know, I see through the lens of food, but the reason why it's such an important lens for us to ask all the big questions is that it's the thing that fundamentally sits at the nexus of our two most important sets of relationships. So one set of relationships is with nature, and the other set is with our fellow humans, with society. And only food sits at the nexus of those two relationships. So if we value food, as everybody today has been saying in different ways, you know, if we value everybody's right to eat as they would wish, you know, then out of that flows, for me, a conception of a better world. I mean, one that's much greener, because I mean, again, you know, I'd have to talk for an hour to fill all the gaps in of the stuff I'm really trying to paint in 3 sentences. But basically, you can't eat well unless the landscape your food came from was sort of sustained by your eating from it. The people who grew your food were sustained. You know, the animals that you may or may not eat, you know, had good lives, etc. So basically, good food is the core, it's the nexus, it's the fulcrum of a beautiful world. And we're really, really good at sharing food. You know, so I often say to people, you know, you don't sit down at a table with friends and kind of, and it was very moving, by the way, hearing, you know, Pinky's stories of growing up and Chandni's as well. I mean, all these amazing stories of the food of our childhood. You know, you never sit down at a family meal and kind of go, well, I'm going to have all of this, you know, screw you. We never do this. But that's what we do when we share through money. So I also think, you know, if we can embed the value in our society back in food, and think of it as the thing that we're primarily sharing, then this is going to be a really important step to building a more resilient, more equitable, basically better world going forward. So I've been, as I say, hugely inspired today. I've got so many notes of things people said, but I don't think we have time now and everyone's exhausted. But I just want to say, you know, the people in this group you are the game changers. You know, you have the power because you feed people and you change the way we think about food. And I often look at that diagram that Paul's got sitting behind him of, you know, all the strategic development goals. food sits right at the middle. It literally is the one thing that links all of them. So thank you so much for caring. Thank you so much for the inspiration. Know that what you're doing has massive resonance outside the world of food, because food literally sits at the center of everything. And if we value it and we treasure it and we treat it and those we feed and share with love, we'll be all right. We can do this.
Yeah, Carolyn, I appreciate your such positive words and support, and it's been wonderful to hear from the continents. You know, we've got the Americas, we've got Africa, we've got India, we've got Europe. I appreciate that China's probably in just a slightly over there on timelines because they're all asleep at the moment. But you know, it's been a global discussion, and it seems to be, you know, Michael and Conor talking about the same issues being faced in different countries.
Amazing.
And, you know, and you're talking about we need to be sharing this kind of knowledge of food and you know, need to be sharing our plates in order for this world to get on and to be healthy.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge tension. I mean, again, one of the things, you know, absolutely incredible hearing Michael's stories and Conor, as you say, the same phenomenon, you know, that people, a good life has to be based around, I believe, you know, the ability to feed yourself. And, you know, and historically, most humans in history, you know, as I said in my introductory film, you know, home was a place where you could feed yourself, you know, and I think that it still has to be that. So even if you live in a city, you know, you can still have a close connection with the land. You can still care about the people who are growing the food for you, you know, and this is absolutely fundamental, as I say. A good life is not just a happy life, it's also a morally, you know, it's an ethically sound life, and food, again, is one thing that joins those two things together. So, I mean, all through the discussions today, I saw an incredible tension between traditional values, indigenous foods, you know, incredible knowledge, which is precisely the kind of knowledge that we need if we're going to flourish to the end of this century and beyond it. You know, so again, you know, Pinky talking about not being able to get hold of amaranth, you know, but the ladies are growing it in their gardens and sort of selling it on the side of the road. So we need to get back to this kind of, you know, this knowledge. And again, another thing I wanted to say earlier, sorry, you let me back in, that was dangerous. So another 5 minutes.
That's why I wanted to, I'm milking you, Carolyn, I'm milking you, I'm not letting up.
Also another big idea that came through to me from all the things that were being said today is that we have to embrace complexity. You know, so again, several chefs were talking about the fact that, you know, there's these amazing indigenous food cultures that are about, you know, so much more than just nourishing yourself, but actually connecting you to a place, you know, making you feel at home, which is absolutely the basis. It has to be the basis of a good life when we have to consume less going forward. And what's the one thing you have to consume every day? Food. So this is, I mean, again, I'm a bit of an Epicurean in this respect. I think, you know, making virtue out of necessity. So Epicurus talks about, you know, the fact that we have to eat every day. So get your pleasure from the fact that we have to eat. And personally, I do this very effectively. I get extremely excited when I get hungry because I think, wow, you know, I've got another opportunity to eat incredible food, you know, and make the world better and get pleasure. I mean, there's just nothing like this. So this has to be the basis of a good life. Whereas, you know, dialing up Deliveroo at 3 in the morning and just going, oh, I'll just have, you know, I'll have Thai tonight or something. This to me is morally corrupt, literally, because to care this little about your food and about the people, you know, where it came from and the people who made it is just a sort of a direction we don't want to go down. And also, I mean, a lot of people talked about how in COVID, we've rediscovered the joy of taking trouble with food. And, you know, so many people have just said, oh, I'm baking bread again, or I'm pickling, or I'm, you know, cooking with my kids. The low-hanging fruit of a good life are the things I often say that people wish they'd done more of when they're lying on their deathbed. You know, literally, nobody lies on their deathbed and says, I wish I'd bought another 100 Louis Vuitton handbags. You know, this doesn't happen. They say, I wish I'd spent more time with my loved ones. You know, I just want to lie in my bed and look out at the garden. I want contact with nature. And I just want people I cherish around me. So, you know, we can build this. Again, this is the great insight of the Stoics. We can build this stuff into our lives now, you know, by literally allowing the things that we have to do every day, food, the one thing we have to consume every day, food, be the source of pleasure, you know, be the source of acquiring skill, be the source of connecting with people, connecting with place, acquiring skill. you know, and again, so many incredible, Eduardo, I mean, Eduardo's stories of, you know, sort of literally every household having its own mole recipe. And again, as I said in my film at the beginning, you know, the fact that the so-called mundane act of eating, I mean, mundane is a really interesting word because we use it to mean kind of boring and routine, but the root is mundus. The root is world, it's cosmic, it's of the world. So the act of eating every day is what connects, you know, this sort of everyday kind of sort of, you know, you hardly think about it maybe act, but to literally to cosmic time. Yeah. And this is the basis of ritual. And so, you know, again, you know, we have this incredible power. You know, the fact that food is there, and through food we can build meaning, we can build resilience, we can build love and connection and a better economy. So, you know, I'm an absolute believer that food can change the world and can save the world.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you very, very much. Well, I think we're going to draw it to a close and shift to our chef's hour now. I think that we've covered as much around migration and movement as possible. I just can't thank everyone enough. I'm just blown away by everybody's stories and capacity to tell what it is they've done for the world of food. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for your involvement. Paul, you and I, back to the mundane. That's been a good few hours. We're going to invite the chefs into the chef's hour now, and hopefully pull up some stuff around pride and being proud and egoism and supporting chefs around the world, in Africa and India and the Americas. But for now, do we say our goodbyes, Paul? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been great. So just want to do a special thank you to the London Action Hub at OmVed Gardens and the Irish Hub in GIY. And then all the chefs that have curated the conversations. It's been great to have a diversity of voices, not only speaking, but also interviewing and directing the conversation. We want to do that as much as possible as we go forward. And one of the things I'm kind of just even looking at the chat aware of is there's so many conversations, and it would be great if chefs do have reflections on this further, that they want to jot some ideas. We'd love to publish some blogs, some essays, some ideas, even photo essays on the Chefs Manifesto website on this topic. So I would love to see, you know, what different people's views are on this, what has been sparked, what reflections you've had as you're eating a meal, as you're exploring food, what's coming through. We would love to hear from more of you, and looking forward to our next conversation. But for now, please, for those chefs that are on the call, we're going across. There's a link in there for you to come across into a conversation. We'll just go up until the next hour. Everyone else, really appreciate it. We're going to have live on YouTube everything very soon, and we'll do a good summary and get that out to everyone. So thank you, Arthur and team, and thank you, Carolyn, for such a great start and summary. So,
all right. Well, I'll see you all on the next channel for the next hour of merriment and happiness with chefs. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.